The warrior clutches his side as he staggers along the mountain path. Drops of blood ooze through gauntleted fingers, leaving a crimson trail in the snow behind. He had come here as a pilgrim to climb the 7,000 steps and seek the wisdom of the elders at High Hrothgar. But this was no easy path. He had been buffeted by blizzards and nearly swept off the mountain by a raging avalanche. Then he was ambushed, teeth and claws striking from out of the snow. A frost troll. He was a seasoned fighter, but this had been the battle of his life, blade ringing against claw in a deadly dance. At last, he'd managed to break off the tip of his blade in the beast's throat, but the damage had been done. The troll's claws had torn open a bloody seam down his flank. So far from help, no warrior, no matter how brave, could survive a wound so grievous. So he had simply soldiered on, counting the steps as he staggered up them. 5,000, then 6, but eventually he could go no further. Too much blood had been spilt, too much energy expended, so he had found an overhang of rock to shield himself from the snow and began to ready himself for death. Yet he did not feel sorrow. He did not even feel afraid. His heart knew only joy, for he had the knowledge that his death would be an honourable one, and his ancestors were smiling down upon him. And when he took his last breath, his soul would ascend to Shore's hallowed halls in Sovngarde, where he would spend a glorious eternity in feast and battle. As his vision began to blur, the sky above him seemed to open, the light of Aetherius bleeding through from the beyond. And in that light, he saw a woman who wore the face of everyone he had ever loved. She walked down to meet him, the wind itself her staircase. Soon, all the world had turned to black, and he could see only her radiant light. And she knelt down before him, and her lips touched his brow, and the last breath left his shattered form. And in that moment, he felt a sense of pure elation, his soul lifted from his broken body as she carried it skyward. He left behind his pain, his regrets, all his earthly sorrows, as his spirit soared higher and higher. And on the lips of his still face there was a smile, for he knew what all Nords know deep in their heart, that after death, Sovngarde awaits. This mountain, where the warrior met his end, is known to the Nords as the Throat of the World. It is the greatest mountain in all of Tamriel, and the holiest place in Nordic tradition. For legends say this is where their people began, as the goddess Kine, the mother of storms, descended from the heavens to breathe life into their mortal forms, infusing them with the fire that burns in their souls. And, as their life began with Kine's breath, so shall it end. For the Nords know her as the kiss at the end. Upon their death, the goddess will take their last breath upon the winds and lead their soul to the promised afterlife of Sovngarde. The breath of Kine is the animus that drives the Nords, and wherever they go, whatever they do, they are driven by her blessing, by the knowledge that after their last breath, their souls will join their ancestors in drink and battle and song. This is the story of the children of the sky, those sons and daughters of Kine. This is the story of their home, a harsh, frozen land where history is measured in blood. This is the story of Skyrim, home of the Nords. The earliest history of Skyrim is shrouded in myth. While some cultures, such as the Altmer, have had their creation myths handed down unbroken, the Nords have not been so fortunate. This may be due to the culture of oral tradition. In ancient times, the Nordic Skalds passed down their sagas through song, yet not all were recorded for posterity. As the text Lost Legends remarks, the history of Skyrim is vast, predating even the most ancient records of Man and Mer. Much has been lost, fallen to the ravages of war or the turning of the ages, but nothing is ever truly forgotten. Where no records exist, legends and folk tales offer us a key to the past, a way to piece together truths half remembered in the minds of men. Still, a few of their songs and sagas have survived the ages, allowing us to piece together the broad strokes of the old Nordic myths. Like most cultures, the Nords believe the mortal plane was created by the missing god, Lorcan. The Nords know him as Shor, the father of man, and the chief of the gods in the Elder Days. They say he fought Alduin the World Eater on the spirit plane at the dawn of all things, and will return to fight him once more at the end of time. There are many ancient Nordic legends of Shor and his fellow gods during the dawn times. Kine, the goddess of wind, who was the wife of Shor. Stune, the god of ransom and justice, who taught the Nords to take prisoners in battle. And Tsun, god of trials, who sacrificed his life to save Shor. It was Shor who created the realm of Sovngarde using his clever magic, carving out an afterlife in the heavens for his most worthy followers, where they can spend an eternity in battle and revelry. In the ancient days, Shor led the early men into a great battle against the elven gods. This first war shook the very bones of the world, causing whole mountain ranges to rise and entire continents to fall away beneath the sea. But eventually, Shor was struck down by Auriel, the elven dragon god, who tore Shor's heart from his chest. The elven gods raised Shor's heart high as a standard, and the men shrank back in fear, stricken by the loss of their leader. It was not until one hero, Isgramor, shouted sense back into them that the army of men rallied. Ultimately, the elven gods were routed by the raging tide of men. Understanding that they faced defeat, the elven gods tried to destroy the heart of Shor, but it mocked them and said, "This heart is the heart of the world, for one was made to satisfy the other." So instead, they hid the heart deep beneath the earth, so that the men they hated would always be deprived of their leader. And the heart of Shor remains lost to this day, the heart of the world forever sundered from its creator. And in Sovngarde, his throne remains empty, awaiting the day the missing god will return. These are the mythic origins of the Nords, but it is hard to tell where legend ends and history begins. As we have seen, the Nords believe they were first brought into being in Skyrim itself. Nords consider themselves to be the children of the sky. They call Skyrim the throat of the world, because it is where the sky exhaled on the land and formed them. They see themselves as eternal outsiders and invaders, and even when they conquer and rule another people, they feel no kinship with them. According to this legend, they spread out across the north, crossing the Sea of Ghosts to settle the continent of Atmora, which in those days was a green and pleasant land. So when Isgramor led his companions to Skyrim, it would not be invasion or colonization, but as a triumphant return to their ancestral homeland. Still, not all accept this interpretation of the Nords' origins. Some scholars believe that men are not indigenous to Tamriel at all, but that they first arose in the Elder Wood of Atmora. Tradition has it that the first humans came to Tamriel from the continent of Atmora in ancient days. It was not a single invasion, but a series of them over hundreds of years, creating many different Nordic cultures. The new arrived Atmorans always clashing with the generations that had already established themselves. And then there are some who believe the truth lies somewhere in the middle, that some humans first awakened on Tamriel, with others having their origins in Atmora. These indigenous men of Tamriel would become the Nordic peoples, ancestors of the modern Imperials and Bretons, while the Atmorans became the Nords. There is some evidence to support each of these theories of human origin, though we will probably never know the truth for certain. Regardless of their origins, the men of Atmora would become the progenitors of the people we now know as the Nords. Their land was cold, more frigid even than Skyrim, but fertile in its own way. The great frostwood and the vast plains of tundra were a crucible for the Atmoran people. Here, survival could not be taken for granted. It had to be earned by strength, cunning, and sheer will. This was a dangerous land, and many perils stalked its forests. Frost giants that could crush a man with a single hand, white stags that could deform into mist, giant goats that walked upright and ate men alive. This harsh land bred hardy people, and over time, the tribes of Atmora developed a powerful warrior tradition. But they were far more than mere barbarians, and developed a culture of their own, complete with their own runic writing system. Some fragments of this language have survived the centuries, describing what appear to be ancient religious practices. One of these fragments describes the cult of the Mother Moth, which is believed by some to be the Atmoran interpretation of the goddess Dibella. We must honour her nightly with burnings and bonfires. Our pyres grow bigger, burn hotter. As the flames lick across our skin, we feel no pain, just the gentle nuzzling of Mother Moth's tongue as we burn for her, lighting the darkness. What little we know of the Atmorans is mainly handed down to us through myths, and the fragments of Atmoran culture that have survived in Nordic tradition. For example, the animal carvings we see in ancient Nordic ruins are thought to be remnants of the Atmoran totemic religion. This faith had cults dedicated to the animals of the Elderwood, the goat, the serpent, the mother moth. Another was the whale, and it's said that in the ancient days, flying snow whales could be seen high above the auroras of the northern skies. It's not certain whether the Atmorans truly worshipped these creatures, or if they were using them as representations for more familiar gods such as the Aedra or Daedra. Yet what is undeniable is that there was one creature the Atmorans held in reverence above all: the dragon. For the Atmorans, the dragons were living gods, and a religion known as the Dragon Cult was dedicated to their worship, with its priests serving as intermediaries between dragons and men. Ultimately, it's not exactly clear where to draw the line between Atmorans and Nords, if such a division even exists at all. But as the memory of the Atmorans faded into history, they would still occupy a unique place in the Nordic imagination, regarded as honoured ancestors and great warriors of old. If we truly want to understand the Nords and the other cultures who have called Skyrim home, then we must consider the nature of the land itself. Skyrim is renowned as the coldest of all Tamriel's provinces, and it is often dismissed as a harsh and barren wilderness on the frontier of civilization. But this view is too simple, for the Land of Skyrim contains a wide range of biomes, from the temperate forests of the Rift to the fertile hunting grounds of the Whiterun Plains. Take a walk through these landscapes, and you will soon understand why this land has been so fiercely contested over the centuries. Skyrim has traditionally been divided into 9 holds, each ruled over by its own Jarl. These are roughly analogous to the counties you might see in a province such as Cyrodiil. Generally speaking, the land can be divided into 2 halves. The eastern holds are known as the Old Holds, and tend to be more traditional and isolationist, whereas the western holds tend to be more cosmopolitan and outward-looking. At times, these divisions have been reflected in political reality, with rival kings crowned in East and West. If you arrive in Skyrim from the east, then you will likely disembark in Windhelm in the hold of Eastmarch. This is home to the Palace of the Kings, built by Ysgramor himself, and the city can boast to be the oldest continuously inhabited human settlement in Tamriel. Take the road north from Windhelm, and you will soon cross into Winterhold. This is the most frigid of all the provinces of Skyrim, located on the freezing shore of the Sea of Ghosts. Winterhold was once a thriving city, until it was devastated by the disaster known as the Great Collapse. Now, aside from the magical college, little remains beyond an inn and a few scattered homes. Head west from Winterhold, and you will soon arrive in the Pale, a region of barren coast and rolling tundras, with the city of Dawnstar serving as its capital. The most southerly of the old holds is the Rift, the most temperate region of Skyrim, remarkable for the autumnal hues of its forests. Nestled between the forest and the lake is the city of Riften, which for much of its history has been an important trading hub between Skyrim, Cyrodiil, and Morrowind. As you leave the old holds, you will pass through the central mountain range, under the looming shadow of the throat of the world. You will then arrive in Whiterun, the hold which lies at the geographical heart of the province. Its landscape is dominated by wide open plains, which are home to some of Skyrim's most fertile farmlands and hunting grounds, fed by the rushing torrent of the White River. The city of Whiterun is built atop a rocky outcrop in the centre of the plain, and is home to Jorvaskr, home of the legendary companions of Ysgramor. If you follow the White River to its source, you will pass by the village of Riverwood and to the shores of Lake Ilanalta. This brings you to Falkreath Hold, a land of mists dominated by sprawling pine forests. Throughout its history, Falkreath has seen many battles and is known as the hero's graveyard for the number of dead interred in its cemeteries. If you head north from here across the plains of Whiterun, you may soon find yourself bogged down by the terrain. This will signal your arrival in Hjalmarch, a sparsely populated hold dominated by vast marshes. Known as the poorest of all the holds, its capital is the town of Morthal, an isolated settlement which sits on the marsh's edge. Heading west of the marsh and crossing the Karth River, you will soon see a majestic sight. The great arch spanning the estuary, with the spires of the City of Solitude looming high above it. This is one of the historical capitals of Skyrim and the seat of imperial power in the province. It is also the centre of Harfingar Hold, which spans the northwest coast, and its position and deep harbour have made it one of the wealthiest trading hubs in northern Tamriel. If you head south from Harfingar, you will soon cross into the wildest region of Skyrim, although there are some who question whether this is truly Skyrim at all. For this is the Land of the Reach, a wild landscape of towering peaks and deep river valleys. It is home to the Reachmen, a race of native humans who are often dismissed as wild men by the other cultures of Tamriel. For centuries, the Reachmen have stubbornly clung to their ancestral traditions, violently resisting all attempts to colonize their homeland. While Nords may rule in the city of Markarth, built atop ancient Dwemer ruins, the wilderness is still plagued by Reachman bandits, who have reverted to the tribal ways of their ancestors and become known as the Forsworn. But the land of Skyrim isn't just confined to the mainland. To the north is the frozen expanse of the Sea of Ghosts, which is home to several remote islands. The largest of these is Solstein, which is inhabited by the Skarl, a tribe of Nord-like humans with their own culture and religion, which strives to live in harmony with nature. Though most other islands in the Sea of Ghosts are too barren for human habitation, a few, such as Bleakrock Isle, host small farming or fishing villages. And it's even whispered that there are darker things hidden among the ice floes of the Northern Sea. Rumours tell of the spires of a castle looming out of the mist, where vampires have built a hidden coven to their dark lord. From the frozen shores of the north, to the hidden valleys of the Reach, to the lush forests of the Rift, Skyrim is a land of contrasts. Perhaps this is why the land has seen so much violence over its history. The land itself is impossible to tame, and this in turn breeds hardy folk who are willing to fight and die for every inch of it. But to comprehend that history, we have to go back to a time before the first ship from Atmora ever arrived on Skyrim shores. The first great civilization in Skyrim was not that of the Nords. It did not even belong to men. For before the First Age, this land was known as Merith, and it was home to the people we remember today as the Snow Elves. From their home in the frozen north, they built a thriving, prosperous civilization which was remarkably advanced for its age. Few details of Snow Elf culture have survived the centuries, and we know of only 2 ruins confirmed to have been built by them. Yet a handful of their texts have endured, and they have given us a remarkable insight into the faith of this forgotten people. Like the Aldmer of Somerset before them, the Snow Elves worshipped Ori-El, the god of time, and they built a great chantry in his name, hidden deep in the Druidak Mountains. Pilgrims flocked from across Merith to pay their respects at the chantry's inner sanctum, though they had to face many trials and tribulations along the way. An account of this pilgrimage has survived in the ancient Snow Elf text known as Touching the Sky. Tales of those who reached the inner sanctum are not without their share of woes. It is said upon their arrival that many were mere shells of the person they had once been. Some were quite mad from sleeplessness and starved to the point of frailty. By the end of their journey, the marvel that they had strength yet to carry their vessel and ascend the stairs of the temple was the last true testament of their loyalty. Regardless of each individual's tale, the final words remain eerily similar. It is said that every pilgrim ascended, bathed in light, a look of relief and contentment on their face. Though the Snow Elves may be long gone, this temple has miraculously survived, secluded in a glacial valley hidden behind impassable mountains, guarded by a lonely sentinel, who may very well be the last member of his race. But what could cause such an advanced civilization to fall so far, to the point where almost every trace of them has been wiped away? Well, the answer largely lies with the actions of one man. He is hailed by the Nords as a hero, but to the Snow Elves of Merith, he was nothing less than the herald of their destruction. The history of the Nords truly begins with Ysgramor, the Harbinger, the bringer of words, the ancestor of all the Nordic kings. He was born and raised in the Elder Wood of Atmora, long before it turned into the frozen wasteland it is today. There are many legends about his youth in Atmora, from stories of him wrestling giants to facing Hermamora in a battle of wits. At some point, civil strife broke out among the clans of Atmora, and Ysgramor and his kin chose to leave, heading across the sea to Tamriel in search of safety. Late in the Merethic era, the brows of Ysgramor's longships would crest the horizon off the coast of Skyrim, before the settlers made landfall at the Broken Cape in the province's far north. They were not the first Atmorans to make this journey, but they would be by far the most consequential. But these were not yet heroes worthy of great sagas. They were simply searching for a place to start a new life. As the book Frontier Conquest notes, Tamriel had served as a safety valve for Atmora for centuries before Ysgramor's arrival. Malcontents, dissidents, rebels, landless younger sons, all made the difficult crossing from Atmora to the new world of Tamriel. For a time, these settlers lived in peace with the Snow Elves of Merith, and they soon founded a civilization of their own. Before long, they had raised a great city on the northern coast of Skyrim, and named it Sarthal. This was the first known human city in all of Tamriel, and it was intended to be the capital of a new Nordic kingdom. But as the Atmorans dug the foundations of their new city, they made a fateful discovery. What happened next has been recounted in the text, the Night of Tears. The Nords found something when they built their city, buried deep in the ground. They attempted to keep it buried, but the elves learned of it and coveted it for themselves. Thus they assaulted Sarthal, their goal not to drive the Nords out, but to secure this power for themselves. The true nature of this artifact, which has been remembered by history as the Eye of Magnus, is not fully understood. But its power was beyond question, and if such potential could be weaponized, then it would be beyond devastating. Although Nordic accounts claim the elves struck first, we do not truly know how hostilities broke out. It's possible that the Snow Elves attacked to seize the eye, but another potentiality is that the Nords tried to use it against their neighbours. Whatever the case, this discovery shattered the fragile peace between Man and Mer. In a single night, the great city of Sarthal was razed to the ground, its people put to the sword by the Snow Elves. It is said that the only survivors of this bloodbath were Ysgramor and his two sons, Ingol and Ilgar. They would flee across the sea back to Atmora, but not in search of safety, for a thirst for vengeance burned in their hearts. As they fled the carnage, Ysgramor wept tears of purest ebony, which his son Ingol gathered up. And Ingol, who was the greatest of smiths, used these tears to forge a new weapon for his father. There, on the sea, Ingol set to work with his tools. He used lightning to heat the night's tears, the ocean's swell to cool them, and always his hammer blows rang in concert with the rising wind. When Ysgramor awoke the next morning, Ingol presented him with a mighty axe, hewn from the sorrow that had laid him low just the night before. Ysgramor named his axe Wuthrad, which means storm's tears in the language of Atmora. With Wuthrad in hand, Ysgramor would pay back the massacre of Sarthal 100-fold, and begin a slaughter so bloodthirsty it would bring the Snow Elves to the brink of extinction. Ysgramor sought out the greatest warriors in all of Atmora, and soon assembled the shield warriors who would become known as the 500 Companions. He made common cause with the great enchanter, Azadal, who imbued the Companions' weapons and armour with powerful magics. Ysgramor then travelled to the Atmoran city of Ilkefike, and ordered the construction of 2 great longships, the largest ever built in those days, to become the flagships of his fleet. And to the sound of booming drums and beating oars, the fleet would set sail out of Atmora, fighting its way through stormy seas as they surged towards Skyrim. But this return was not without tragedy, for Ingol's ship was lost among the deadly swells, and Ysgramor wept once more, this time for the loss of his son. The 500 Companions soon fell upon the Snow Elves, who were taken by surprise by their sudden return. The city of Sarthal was quickly retaken, and no quarter was given, with every elf there butchered like an animal. Then Ysgramor let out a mighty war cry, so great it was heard across the sea in Atmora. Turning to his men, he announced the intention of this bloody crusade. "Go forth," he roared, "into the belly of this new land. Drive the wretched from their places of idleness. Oblige them to squalor and toil, that they would see their betrayals as the all sin against our kind. Give no quarter, show no kindness, for they would not give nor show you the same." The Companions spread out into the land of Merith to perpetrate their bloody war. Among them were the crew of the Jorvaskr, whose descendants would one day found the great city of Whiterun. The Atmorans slaughtered the elves they found in their path, with the survivors forced into servitude, worked to death building cities and temples for their new overlords. While the elves valiantly resisted, they slowly and inevitably lost ground, unprepared for the ferocity of the Atmoran onslaught. One by one, their cities were put to the torch, from the northern coasts to the White River Plains to the forests of the Reach. Some chose to retreat into the mountains, but others rallied behind a new leader, one who rose up in his people's time of greatest need. His name has been lost to history, and today he is remembered only as the Snow Prince. Leading the Snow Elves on the Isle of Solstheim, he mounted a desperate defence. He gathered his forces in the Mosring Mountains, and a great host of men soon marched to meet him. He led a charge into the massed ranks of the Atmorans, tearing through them like a hurricane, cutting down many of their greatest warriors in single combat. For a moment, it seemed like the Snow Elves might finally turn the tables on the Northmen. But the Snow Prince would soon be undone, felled by the unlikeliest of opponents. Finna, daughter of Jofrior, a girl of only 12 years old, watched in horror as her mother was cut down by the Snow Prince. In her rage and grief, she took up her mother's sword and threw it at the elven leader. Caught off guard, the mighty warrior was felled by a mere child. And with him died any hopes of an elven resurgence. The demoralized Snow Elves were driven from the battlefield and hunted down without mercy. Yet the Snow Prince was recognized as a worthy foe and given the honor of a full Atmoran burial, entombed in a barrow worthy of a king. With the fall of the Snow Prince, the Snow Elves teetered on the brink of total annihilation. Some survivors retreated to the great chantry of Auriel, deep within the Druidic mountains. The Forgotten Vale was their holiest sanctum, cut off from the outside world. A few surviving fragments tell of the Snow Elves' despair during these days. I tire of the tears of women and children. My own have run dry. I cannot bring myself to think on the numbers we lost in battle. Yet I cannot force the images of my own losses from my mind. And now, in a time when our people should be banding together, it feels we are drifting apart. The Nords have truly won. Our once great pride and unity are shattered. If we lose hope now, we will never survive. As a last resort, the great chantry was sealed away, forgotten to history. But some Snow Elves found refuge elsewhere, in the halls of the Dwemer, who they viewed as their distant kin. At first, the Dwemer welcomed their cousins from the surface with open arms. But the Snow Elves had been deceived. They were forced into servitude and subject to brutal torture to keep them in line. The Dwemer fed them on a diet of toxic fungi, which rendered the Snow Elves blind, and slowly they began to regress to a primitive existence. The last of the Snow Elves died in the dark, and they were reborn as a twisted mockery of their former glory, the creatures we know today as the Thalmor, the betrayed ones. At last, the downfall of the Snow Elves was complete. This northern land would be known as Merith no more. Forever after, it would be called Skyrim, and recognized as a realm of humankind. This conquest is the crucible in which a new culture would be formed. Those Atmorans who returned with Ysgramor would become the forefathers of the Nords, who have dominated the land of Skyrim ever since. Still, one legend claims their brutal extermination of the Snow Elves would come at a heavy cost. One day, the crew of a ship was preparing to sail from Atmora to Skyrim. Then, a Snow Elf child suddenly appeared before them with a dire warning. "I bring you a message. With your swords and axes you slew our homeland. With the frostfall, we have now slain yours. Look upon these frozen shores for the last time, and know that this is the harvest that your fathers sowed, and their fathers before them." The child vanished into the snow, and was never seen again, and from that day on, there would never again be summer in Atmora. It would become a land of perpetual winter, its green forests and fields slowly turning to inhospitable tundra. This slow-moving disaster became known as the Frostfall, and it would mean doom for the Elderwood. With their conquest of a new land, the Nords may have brought destruction on their ancestral home. Whether or not the Snow Elves were the true cause of the Frostfall remains debated, but it's clear that the northern continent would enter a slow and inevitable decline as its climate slowly became uninhabitable. If Atmora was mankind's past, then the past was dead. The future would have to be found on Tamriel. Yet although the Nords had supplanted the Snow Elves, they were not yet the true masters of Skyrim. For in those days, power wasn't a question of who ruled the land, it was who reigned from the skies. For this was an age of dragons, and they darkened the world beneath the shadow of their wings. It is thought that all dragons are descended from the time god Akatosh, who made them in his own image. The Nords believe that the eldest of the dragons was Alduin, the firstborn of Akatosh, who is destined to consume the world at the end of time, and begin the cycle of the Kalpa anew. The Nordic archmage Shalador wrote the following on the origins of dragons. "Dragons have existed since the beginning of time. In the beginning, dragons were wild and uncivilized, like everything else. Alduin was the creator of dragon civilization. But what did this dragon civilization actually look like? Well, in the earliest days of recorded history, these immortal beings towered over mortal races as gods incarnate. And while the dragons may have been physically formidable, their true power lay in something far deadlier than sheer force: words. The draconic language is capable of speaking concepts into reality. By using its words in a shout, or thum, a user is able to wield spells of immense power, from slowing time to bending the minds of opponents to their will. The dragon Paarthurnax once explained the importance of this ability to the dragons.
There is nothing else but philosophy to a Dova. It is no accident that we do battle with our thum, our voices. There is no distinction between debate and combat to a dragon. Tinvak Loskra. For us, it is one and the same.
But although they demanded submission from mortals, it doesn't seem that the dragons built an empire in the traditional sense. They seemed perfectly content to reign above mortals, and as long as they gave tribute, dragons rarely intervened in worldly affairs. Instead, the dragons delegated their power to the dragon cult, devoted acolytes who ruled in the name of their masters. Many of the ancient Nordic ruins which dot the landscape of Skyrim today were once cities or temples of the dragon cult. This cult was led by the dragon priests, who were taught the secrets of the Thum by their draconic overlords. These dragon priests ruled as kings, wielding power far beyond mortal comprehension. Among their number, the dragon priests counted some of the most notable men of their age, such as Azadal, the great Nord enchanter, and Mirak, the first dragonborn. While it seems that some of the dragon priests were wise and fair rulers, others were corrupted by the unchecked power they wielded. Some strived to maintain the natural order of draconic supremacy, stamping out dissent without mercy. Others were consumed by their quest for ever greater power, becoming even more monstrous than the dragons they served. Some embraced a form of undead lichdom, trading their humanity for immortality, and reigning over armies of undead Draugr. And a few turned to more eldritch sources of power, consorting with Daedric princes such as Hermaeus Mora in search of forbidden secrets. In spite of their cruelty, and perhaps because of it, the dragon priests were able to achieve great feats in the name of their masters. The grand ruins of Labyrinthian were originally built as a temple dedicated to the dragons. Under the rule of Morake, it became a place where the highest priests of the cult would meet to decide matters of ruling. This temple grew into the city of Bromdranar, which became the greatest city of Skyrim in the days of the dragon cult. Though the city was abandoned after the fall of the dragons, its ruins stand to this day, a testament to the forgotten splendour of this ancient time. But no empire can endure forever, not even that of the dragons. Power breeds arrogance, and the dragons believed themselves unassailable, divine beings beyond the reach of mortal defiance. They could not imagine that their thralls, these frail creatures who grovelled at their feet, would ever dare to rise against them. But in the frozen north, whispers of rebellion began to stir. The text, The Dragon War, recalls the origins of this conflict. In Atmora, where Isgramor and his people came from, the dragon priests demanded tribute and set down laws and codes of living that kept peace between dragons and men. In Tamriel, they were not nearly as benevolent. It's unclear if this was due to an ambitious dragon priest, or a particular dragon, or a series of weak kings. Whatever the cause, the dragon priests began to rule with an iron fist, making virtual thralls of the rest of the population. When the populace rebelled, the dragon priests retaliated. When the dragon priests could not collect the tribute or control the masses, the dragon's response was swift and brutal. So it was the Dragon War began. But mere men could not hope to face the might of the dragons and their servants. At first, this was no war, but a slaughter, and the human rebels died in their thousands. Yet some dragons began to question their role in this war. Why should their kind hoard power while mortals cowered in fear? Why must domination be their only legacy? But these were dangerous thoughts, heretical to the great and terrible Alduin. Led by Paarthurnax, these turncoat dragons fled to the side of mortals and helped turn the tide. They taught men the way of the voice, granting them the weapon they needed to bring down their draconic overlords. These first heroes were the tongues, the first mortals to master the Thu'um, turning the weapon of their oppressors against them. With their voices, they could break stone, split the sky, and even bring dragons crashing down. And so, the age of tyranny began to crumble. The first dragon lords fell, their temples abandoned, their worshippers slain or scattered. But this war was far from won. The dragons would not surrender their dominion so easily, and Alduin, the World Eater, would not tolerate defiance. In his wrath, he commanded his kin to bathe the world in flame, to drown it in fire and restore the natural order of dragon rule. Cities were reduced to smouldering ruins, countless lives were lost, but yet the Nords fought on. What had once been a war of survival became a war of annihilation. Only one side would remain standing. Then came the turning point. The tongues, knowing that even their greatest shouts could not best Alduin, turned to the most dangerous weapon of all, an Elder Scroll. With this relic of unfathomable power, 3 Nordic heroes ascended to the throat of the world: Feldir the Old, Hakon One-Eye, and Gormlaith Golden Hilt. In a fierce battle, Gormlaith was slain, and the heroes realized they did not have the power to slay the World Eater. In an act of desperation, Feldir used the Elder Scroll to perform an incantation that ejected Alduin from their time, casting him far into the future, leaving behind a wound in time in his wake. With their leader lost, the dragons faltered. No longer an unbreakable force, they fell one by one. Some fought to the bitter end, their bodies crashing broken from the sky. Others, sensing their doom, fled into hiding, disappearing into mountains, caves, the forgotten places of the world. The time of the dragons was over. The dominion of mortals had begun. Over time, their temples began to crumble, their once feared names fading into memory. Their very existence became the stuff of legend, bedtime stories to scare children. No more did mortals need to cower under the open sky, to fear the shadow of scaled wings. But legends, as the Nords well know, never truly die, and somewhere in time, Alduin endured, lost but far from destroyed. For his defeat was merely delay, his return had been foretold by prophecy. For one day, this world must end so that a new one can be born in its place. No matter how hard mortals may fight it, the wheel of the Kalpa must keep on turning. With the end of the Dragon War, the mortals of Tamriel turned to new gods, new masters. But the defeated dragons did not disappear overnight. Their influence withered over centuries. High atop High Hrothgar, Paarthurnax began his long vigil to await the return of Alduin. He continued to teach mortals the secrets of the voice, and would eventually become the master of the order known as the Greybeards. Hunted and hounded, the rest of the dragons scattered to hiding places across the continent, and to most mortals, became little more than a distant memory. Some, such as the twin dragons Naslarum and Voslarum, fled to remote mountains far from the sight of men or mer. Yet others found stranger places of refuge. Some dragons, such as Latvalon and Narfalar, would later re-emerge among the sands of elsewhere. Through unknown means, the dragon Vulfiol became entombed underground in the vast cavern of Blackreach. And the dragon Durnevere became trapped in a plane of oblivion known as the Soul Cairn, forced to serve the immortal necromancers known as the Ideal Masters. The dragon priests, however, could not flee so easily. Several sects of the dragon cult adapted and survived by going into hiding all across Skyrim. Many held out with the hope that Alduin would one day return and deliver salvation to the faithful. But one by one, dragon priests would be hunted down by the Nords they once oppressed. The ancient city of Ragnvald was ruled by the dragon priest Otar, who had once been a just and wise ruler. But sinister whispers infiltrated his mind, turning him into a cruel tyrant. However, two Nords named Sarek and Torsten emerged as heroes, outwitting the mad priest and liberating Ragnvald from his misrule. Otar was sealed away deep within the city, his name and memory condemned to oblivion. Yet the dragon priests did not go quietly, and often dragged down others in their downfall. Such a tragedy took place in the city of Thorolhost, once ruled by Ragot and his cultists. In the First Era, an army of King Harold of Skyrim's soldiers stumbled across the hidden fortress. Recognizing the potential threat posed by Ragot, they laid siege to Thorolhost. But Ragot and his followers retreated into the inner sanctum of the city and collapsed the tunnels to cover their retreat. Deep within his underground fortress, Ragot devised a devious plan. The cultists would take their lives en masse in an attempt to confuse and demoralize the invaders. Ragot hoped that, upon finding so many corpses, his enemies would assume him dead and abandon their siege. The priest ordered his alchemists to prepare toxins for his followers to ingest and poison their own water supply. The mass killing was soon carried out, and when the Nords took the fortress, they found only the dead and left the city to crumble into ruins, just as Ragot had anticipated. Although a handful of dragon priests ensured their own survival, with many of them becoming undead liches, the vast majority of them were slain, and the dragon cult was abandoned by its former worshippers. But among the dragon priests, there was one whose power stood above all. He was known as the First Dragonborn, and rose to become one of the greatest leaders of the dragon cult. His name was Merak, meaning allegiance guide in the old dragon tongue. He raised a great temple in Solstheim's Mosring Mountains, where he ruled over the local human tribes, the ancestors of the modern Skarl. But over time, Merak became ever more hungry for power, and he entered a pact with Hermaeus Mora, the Daedric Prince of Forbidden Knowledge. Mora taught him the secret words to allow him to bend dragons to his will, and Merak soon turned against his draconic overlords. He used the voice to cast down many dragons, and his status as a dragonborn allowed him to absorb their power. Soon, other powerful priests such as Azadal joined Merak's rebellion, and for a time, it looked as if they might overthrow the dragons altogether. Yet Merak's revolt against the dragons wasn't about freeing mankind. When Hakon One-Eye called for his aid in the war against Alduin, Merak refused to intervene. He didn't just want to destroy the dragons, he wanted to take their place as overlord. But Merak was soon confronted by a powerful dragon priest named Valok the Jailer, who engaged him in a devastating duel using the power of the voice. This contest was immortalized in the Skarl legend, The Traitor and the Guardian. The traitor's plot was discovered by one of his contemporaries, another dragon priest whom legend named the Guardian. The two fought a mighty battle that lasted for days, each hurling terrible arcane energies and Thu'um shouts at the other. So great and terrible were the forces unleashed in this contest that Solstheim was torn apart from the mainland of Skyrim. Just as Valok struck down Merak, Hermaeus Mora intervened, snatching his champion away before he could be dealt a killing blow. Merak was imprisoned in Mora's realm of Apocrypha, becoming little more than a thrall of the Demon of Knowledge. But although his temple was destroyed, and his name erased from the pages of history, memory of him still lingered in the legends of the Skarl of Solstheim. And out there in Apocrypha, Merak was biding his time, gathering power and knowledge so that he might one day break free of his prison. As the First Era dawned and the Merethic era faded into memory, the Nords would consolidate their hold over Skyrim. In the year 1E143, King Harold would ascend to the throne, his rule marking the beginning of recorded Nordic history. Under his rule, the Nords would finally relinquish all claims to their ancestral lands in Atmora. The Nords of Skyrim were now a separate people, and their destiny would lie in Tamriel. Under Harold's leadership, the Nords would purge the last holdouts of the dragon cult and the Snow Elves from the land, and push their frontiers even deeper into the continent. Many of the traditions of Nordic kingship find their origins in Harold's rule. The city of Windhelm was established as his capital, and the tradition of the Moot, a convention of Jarls who gather to name a new High King, was enshrined as precedent during this time. It was Harold who transformed the Nords from a loose collection of clans into a unified kingdom for the first time. Using the teeth of a dragon, he forged the jagged crown with his own hands, and to this day, the crown endures as a symbol of royal power and legitimacy. He enforced discipline on the Nordic armies, equipping them with new armor and weapons, forging them into a fighting force that would soon sweep over the continent in a tide of blood. When Harold died at the age of 108, his son Vraga assumed the throne. He is remembered by history as both the Gifted and the Butcher. Under his command, the Nordic conquest would reach their greatest extent. They pushed deep into High Rock, breaking the hold of the Durrani elves over the province. They also raided deep into Cyrodiil, seizing a large section of the fertile Nibelheim Valley and marching alongside the armies of Alessia in her rebellion against the Aelids. But their greatest conquest would come in the east, in the land of Resdain, that we know today as Morrowind. The Nords exploited the fighting between the Kaimer and the Dwemer, sweeping across the land and seizing everything save for the island of Vardenfell and the subterranean strongholds of the Dwarves. At its greatest extent, the Empire of the Nords spanned the entirety of the north of Tamriel. With the rise of the Nords, and Alessia's overthrow of the Aelids and establishment of the First Empire of Man, the golden age of the Elves was over for good. The Age of Men had arrived. But the Nordic conquests were not only the result of the Nords' fighting prowess, for they wielded a weapon against which their enemies had no defense. In those days, the greatest Nordic warriors were also students of the voice. These tongues were so powerful that they went around gagged, communicating through signs and gestures, for even the barest whisper was a threat to those around them. When they attacked a city, the Nords had no need to lay siege. The tongues would simply shout the gates apart, allowing their berserkers to swarm in and overwhelm the stunned defenders. They were said to be able to use the Thu'um to cross great distances, shouting over hundreds of miles and appearing where the sound of their voice landed. But the tongues were able to wield stranger magics than simple destruction. Hogue, the Mouth of Mud, was said to fill his mouth with soil and breathe it back into fallen warriors, allowing them to rise again as undead wights. With this power, the Nords would conquer city after city, and none could stand against their onslaught. Yet the ancient Nords were far more than just marauding barbarians. They built great works, such as the ruins of their temples and barrows, which can still be found scattered across Skyrim today. Above all, the ancient Nords respected the power of words. In the mouths of their skalds and bards, they created great songs and poetry. In the mouths of their tongues, they were weapons that could level cities. It's often said that the Nords are suspicious of magic, but in the Elder Days, they had great respect for the practitioners of the arcane arts. They called them the clever men, and they wielded old magics in ritual and battle. They were able to commune with spirits, summon Daedra to their cause, and even shapeshift into animal form. The greatest of the Nord wizards was Shalador the Archmage, one of the most powerful of all mortal mages, and many legends about his deeds persist to this day. It was said that he built the city of Winterhold with but a whisper, stole the secrets of life from Akatosh himself, and single-handedly turned back the Dwemer legions of Clan Rorken in battle. To test aspiring mages, Shalador built a great maze within the ruins of the dragon cult stronghold of Brumjanar, Labyrinthian. Some even claim that Shalador hid the stolen secrets of life deep within the labyrinth. Whatever the case, the great labyrinth of Shalador still holds many secrets which it guards jealously, and many who pass its gates are never seen again, lost forever within its depths. Yet although the rise of the Nordic Empire was swift, its decline would be even more sudden. None could question the Nords' valor in war, but winning an empire is only half the battle. The harder thing is keeping it. As they expanded so rapidly, they simply did not have the institutions or expertise to administer these vast conquests. And so the empire soon fell into disarray. In the year 1E369, High King Borgas was slain by the Wild Hunt during an ill-fated expedition to Valenwood. Leaving no clear heir to the throne, the Moot was unable to agree upon a successor, leading to 50 years of civil strife in Skyrim that would become known as the War of the Succession. As the Nords fought among themselves, their conquered territories rose up in arms against them. In Morrowind, the great war leader Indorval Nerevar would unite the Chimer people and forge a united front with the Dwemer. Aided by the warrior poet Vivek, Nerevar would best many of the Nordic chieftains in single combat. Shemua, known as the Running Hunger, had the power to turn the rain itself into bile, but he was ultimately slain by the combined might of Nerevar and Vivek. Barg the Two-Tongued had the powers of surety and form change, but was felled in a great debate with the warrior poet. Barfok, the Maid of Plains, was thought to be unbeatable in battle, for she could shape the very outcome of events by singing them into being. But finally, her voice would be silenced by the blade of Vivek's spear. Soon, the Nords would be driven from Morrowind entirely, and they soon lost all of their holdings outside of Skyrim. As war raged across the face of Tamriel, it also smouldered deep beneath the surface. By the early First Era, the Dwemer had established a number of city-states deep under the snows of Skyrim. Led by Clan Kragan, these colonists had opposed the alliance forged with the Chimer in their homeland of Morrowind, and so instead chose to chart their own future. Soon, Dwemer holdings and city-states would dot Skyrim from the Velothi Mountains to Markarth, their presence on the surface only the tip of the iceberg. And as they dug underneath Skyrim, they discovered a great wonder, the giant Cavern of Blackreach, so large it could have been a kingdom in its own right. 4 great dwarven cities were built around it, Arkenthams, Betharzel, Mazulft, and Raldbathar. As the Nordic Empire rose, these city-states formed an alliance that was able to repel the Nords for more than 100 years. But soon, they would make a discovery that would cause the Dwemer clans to turn against one another. Etherium. This luminescent blue crystal was incredibly rare and valuable, but no conventional forge could melt it. So the dwarves constructed a forge of unprecedented power and complexity, the Etherium Forge, capable of working Etherium ore into artifacts of great magical power. But such great power inevitably bred jealousy, and the 4 Dwemer city-states soon turned upon one another, trying to claim the power of the forge for themselves. The end, when it came, was swift. In the span of 3 short years, the great dwarven cities of Skyrim, from Markarth to the Velothi Mountains, fell before the armies of the High King. Cities that had held fast against the Nords for over 100 years crumbled abruptly and without warning. It would be more than a century before the dwarves would reclaim their lost holdings, taking advantage of the civil strife among the Nords. Though the Dwemer held a technological advantage over the Nords, especially with their automatons, the Nords' mastery of the voice allowed them to hold their own in battle. Though the dwarven cities were eventually restored, they would never again reach the heights they enjoyed before the Etherium Wars. Now, let us turn our gaze back to the surface. By the time Olaf One-Eye was crowned as High King of Skyrim in 1E420, and the Wars of Succession finally came to an end, the Empire of the Nords was shattered. The new High King focused on consolidating his kingdom, bringing the Nords together after half a century of internal strife. The City of Solitude resisted his rule and was brutally suppressed. To this day, the Bards of Solitude still burn effigies of the king they consider a tyrant. Still, the kingdom was reunified under his rule, and even expanded with the conquest of the Reach. Yet he is best remembered for his capture of the dragon Numenex, who he imprisoned in the castle of Whiterun, earning it the name of Dragon's Reach. Some accounts claim that he used the Thu'um to best Numenex, others that he made some kind of bargain with the dragon. Whatever the truth, the skull of Numenex has become a symbol of the city of Whiterun, and sits above the Jarl's throne to this day. Little is known for sure about the reigns of Olaf's successors, Kjorek the White and Hogue Merkiller. Some legends say Kjorek was slain by Imperial forces in a battle over Falkreath, while Hogue is thought to have fallen during the Battle of the Glenumbra Moors in High Rock. Regardless of the circumstances of their deaths, the stage would be set for the entry of one of the greatest figures in the history of Skyrim, if not the whole of Tamriel. He has been known by many names throughout history: Ysmir, the Ash King, the Dragon of the North, the Breath of Kine. But he was born Wulfharth of Atmora, and when Hogue Merkiller was slain, the Pact of Chieftains anointed him as the new High King. He was a powerful wielder of the Thu'um, and his voice was so dangerous that he could not be verbally sworn in as king, and needed the aid of scribes to take his oaths. A staunch traditionalist, his first command was to tear down the Alessian temples to the Eight Divines and reinstate the old Nordic pantheon. The Imperial religion had been making headway into Skyrim since the rise of the Alessian Empire, but the new king demanded a return to the old ways. The Alessian priests were burned alive, and the Nords named their king Shor's Tongue for his zealotry. Ysmir Wulfharth led his warriors to many victories, and in his heart blazed one ambition: to recover the lost conquests of the Nords and restore their shattered empire. But he died before he could realise this ambition, although our accounts differ on exactly how. The 5 songs of King Wulfharth portray his death as a noble sacrifice. The death god Orki summoned Alduin, who consumed the lifespan of the Nords, reducing them all to children. Wulfharth prayed to save his people, and the Father of Man returned to battle with Alduin. As Wulfharth watched the 2 gods battle with their voices, he learned a new word of power from their duel, and used it to change his people back to normal. But he gave up too much of his own life force in the process, and withered away. The Dunmer tell another, less noble story of Wulfharth's downfall. It was said that Wulfharth duelled with Nerevar, Morrowind's greatest champion. Ysmir's shouts were strong enough to uplift entire villages, but Nerevar grappled them from the air with his bare hands, turning them back against the Nordic king. The sound of his own shouts caused Ysmir Wulfharth to lose his mind, driving him out of the land of Morrowind, though one day he would return with a vengeance. It's impossible for us to know for sure how Wulfharth really fell, but one thing is certain: death was not enough to contain the Dragon of the North, for he would soon rise again as the Ash King. As the Dwemer and the Chimer warred among themselves in Morrowind, the Nords saw an opportunity to reclaim their lost lands and began to prepare an invasion. But they were without a strong king to lead them. Then, a stranger walked into the Nordic halls. He told the Nords that the heart of Shor had been found, deep within Red Mountain. And so the Nords gathered their greatest tongues, and they sang the ghost of Shor back into the world. And Shor mustered a great army, and gathered up the ashes of Wulfharth, and breathed life back into them. And this great army of the Nords marched into Morrowind, to claim the heart of Shor for their own. But the Nords had been deceived, for the news of Shor's heart was not brought by any ordinary stranger, but by the devil of Dagoth himself. This was Thorin Dagoth, who would go down in history as Dagoth-ur, a nightmare who haunted the dreams of the Dunmer people. Due to this treachery, the Nords would soon be trapped between the armies of the Chimer and the Dwemer, who momentarily put aside their hatred to deal with these new invaders. The 5 songs recount what happened next. As soon as Shor's army had got to Red Mountain, all the devils and dwarves fell upon them. Their sorcerers lifted the mountain and threw it onto Shor, trapping him underneath Red Mountain until the end of time. They slaughtered the sons of Skyrim, but not before King Wulfharth killed King Doom Malakath the Dwarf Orc and doomed his people. Then Vek the Devil blasted the Ash King into hell, and it was over. This is the traditional Nordic tale of the disaster at Red Mountain, but there was another secret song which told a different version of events. In this telling, Shor, Dagoth and Wulfharth battled their way into the heart chamber beneath Red Mountain and reunited Shor with his heart. But then they were confronted by Lord Nerevar, along with his shield companion, Alandro Sul, and Dumak, king of the Dwemer. In this climactic battle, Wulfharth was struck down by Alandro Sul, but not before shouting him blind. Dagoth slew Dumak before being killed by Nerevar in turn. Shor and Nerevar were the last two standing. After a fierce duel, Shor mortally wounded Nerevar, but with his dying breath, the Hortator used the dagger Keening to cut out Shor's heart, leaving the missing god broken once more. Due to the contradictions in these accounts, we will never truly know what happened in the Heart Chamber on that fateful day. But in the aftermath of the battle, 3 things were clear. First, the Dwemer had all vanished from Nirn in a single instant. Second, the Chimer were transformed into the Dunmer. And finally, the Nords had been driven from Morrowind for good. With the disappearance of the Dwemer, their halls across Skyrim were left empty, the only sounds remaining the clanging of their steam pipes and the trundling of their automatons. But although the history of the Dwemer in Morrowind is well known, the story of their cousins in Skyrim remains overlooked. For hundreds of years, they built hidden kingdoms beneath the mountains and the tundra, their works numbering among the greatest of dwarven accomplishments. But as the Nords marched on Red Mountain, another war waged below Skyrim, unbeknownst to the surface world. The Thalmor, blinded, enslaved, and betrayed by the Dwemer, rose up in rebellion against their oppressors. In the depths of Blackreach, the fallen Snow Elves battled against the Dwemer and their animunculi in a subterranean war that would drag on for decades. But one day, as the Thalmor sallied forth to meet their foes, they found that they had all vanished. Slowly, they moved out into many of the abandoned Dwemer cities, building primitive villages among the haunted ruins. But the Thalmor did not stop there. Finally free from the threat of their Dwemer overlords, the Thalmor were able to spread freely throughout Blackreach. But years of fighting the dwarves had left them bloodthirsty and brutal. Feeling the need to conquer, to kill, they began mounting raids to the surface world. And so the legends began, of small, blind, goblin-like creatures who would rise from the cracks of the earth in the dead of night to slaughter cattle, attack lonely travelers, and steal sleeping babes from their cribs. Ever since, whispers of cave-dwelling monsters have continued to haunt the dreams of the Nords of Skyrim, though few know the real truth. Some believe that the Thalmor are intelligent beings, not beasts, and that one day they may rise again to reclaim their lost civilization. But for now, they remain elusive, building a new way of life in the darkness, and whispering to strange gods in the deep places of the world. After the defeat at Red Mountain, the Nords were demoralized, their dreams of a restored empire shattered for good. Some believe that they simply had not been powerful enough and needed to redouble their efforts, rising again, harder and stronger. But one Nord took a more philosophical path. Jurgen Windcaller was among the mightiest of all Nordic tongues, but even he did not understand how his people had been humbled at Red Mountain. So he climbed the 7,000 steps to the throat of the world, seeking answers in that holiest of places. Thus began his great meditation. After 7 years of silent introspection, the Windcaller came to an epiphany. As the Greybeard Arngeir describes it,
"After the disaster at Red Mountain, where the Nord army was annihilated, he spent many years pondering the meaning of that terrible defeat. He finally came to realize that the gods had punished the Nords for their arrogant and blasphemous misuse of the voice. He was the first to understand that the voice should be used solely for the glory and worship of the gods, not the glory of men."
For Jurgen, the voice was not a weapon, it was something far greater, a method of enlightenment. And so Jurgen founded the philosophy known as the Way of the Voice, railing against the short-sighted use of the Thu'um as a weapon, and advocating a pacifist creed that saw the voice as a path to inner peace. Yet this was met with opposition by many of his rival tongues, who saw Jurgen as a coward, a traitor to the Nordic martial traditions. 17 tongues arrived at High Hrothgar to put him in his place, and close the book on his foolish philosophy for good. But although Jurgen had become a pacifist, he was far from defenseless. He used the Thu'um to swallow the shouts of all 17 tongues, in a clash that raged for 3 days and nights. Finally, when they were exhausted, the defeated tongues kneeled before Jurgen, and became the first of his disciples, the Greybeards. Ever since, they have been the guardians of the Thu'um, living in seclusion at the throat of the world. But the Way of the Voice has led the Thu'um to fall out of use in Skyrim, turning from a key part of their martial culture into an esoteric system of belief. In their isolation at High Hrothgar, the Greybeards rarely shared their knowledge with the rest of the world. And so, over time, the Nords lost their connection to the voice, and in the modern era, some believe it's little more than an old wives' tale. And throughout the centuries, when Skyrim has been shaken by war and crisis, the Greybeards have always been reluctant to intervene, too afraid of upsetting the balance of the world to risk putting their hands on the scales. Almost 2 millennia of Skyrim's history is largely unrecorded, from the death of Jurgen Windcaller to the rise of the Second Empire in Cyrodiil. We know few details about what events transpired in the north. But what we do know is that during the mid-First Era, the Nords would continue to expand to their south and west, into the harsh, mountainous region known today as the Reach. The Reach is one of the most contested regions in Tamriel. Situated between High Rock, Hammerfell, and Skyrim, it has been variously claimed by all 3 nations. But the original inhabitants of the land are the Reachmen, a tribal culture who's every bit as hardy as the environment which has shaped them. Often feared as witchmen by the other cultures of Tamriel, the Reachmen are known for their veneration of the Daedra and their practice of nature magic. Though they have been conquered again and again, no foreign leader has been truly able to suppress them, and the unique culture of the Reach has endured despite repeated occupations by foreign powers. But around the year 1030 of the First Era, a figure would rise to power who would go down in history as one of the Reach's greatest heroes. Thus began his legend, Reachchild, born under auspicious skies, his very name the colour of blood. 10 kings ruled the Reach in those days, and though men were free, the people were scattered and warred among themselves. The augurs foresaw the boy's destiny, a warrior without peer, first and foremost Lord of the Reach, chosen to unite all under his name. His name was Faulan, the Red Eagle, and it seemed inevitable that he would forge the Reach into a unified kingdom. But soon, the legions of the Alessian Empire came over the mountains from Cyrodiil and demanded the Reachmen's submission. Although the other leaders of the Reach bent the knee, Faulan decided to fight on and waged a brutal guerrilla war against the Cyrodiilic invaders. Eventually, he was cornered in his stronghold, and it was said that he killed 1,000 Imperials before they cut him down. But although Red Eagle was slain, an entire Imperial legion was lost, and the Empire was forced to withdraw back across the mountains. If not for the Red Eagle's sacrifice, the Reach may have just become another province of Cyrodiil, and its people's identity may have been lost, assimilated into Imperial culture like so many others have been. But without Red Eagle, the Reachmen were unable to resist the steady encroachment of the Nords, and at some point in the First Era, the Nords seized the city of Markarth, which served as the region's capital. Although the Nordic hold on the Reach was far from secure, this period would mark the beginning of Nordic domination over the region. And although there have been times of Reachman self-rule, their history has been inextricably linked with that of Skyrim, and they have never truly been able to break free from its influence. As kingdoms of men and elves rose and fell in Skyrim, there were other, hidden realms whose existence was only whispered about in fearful rumours. These were the domains of the vampire clans, who carved out secret domains in the frigid corners of the north. Out of all the provinces of Tamriel, the Land of Skyrim was perhaps the most fertile hunting ground for these sanguinary predators. It was said that in Skyrim, vampires were able to freeze their victims' blood in their veins with a breath. Stories tell of them lurking beneath frozen lakes, able to reach up through the ice without breaking it, and pulling their victims down to an icy grave below. The greatest of all the vampire clans were the Volkihar, ruling from their dark fortress off the northern coast of Harfingar. The clan's patriarch, Harkon, had been a mortal lord, but he became increasingly fearful of death, until his terror became all-consuming. So he made a deal with Molag Bal, the Daedric prince of domination. In a dark ritual, Harkon, along with his wife Valerica and his daughter Serana, were turned into pure-blood vampires by Molag Bal himself. Now a vampire lord, Harkon became obsessed with the prophecy of the tyranny of the sun, which foretold a time when the sun would vanish from the sky, allowing vampires to roam freely and without fear. To prevent Harkon's mad ambitions, Valerica sealed away her daughter Serana and hid herself in the realm of oblivion known as the Soul Cairn. With his plans frustrated, Harkon would scheme in isolation for thousands of years, with the Volkihar only venturing from their stronghold to feast on mortal prey, or purge the rabid vampires they deemed as inferior. But vampire clans did not only stalk the lands above Skyrim, but also below it. In the First Era, a clan known as the Night Hollow founded a hidden bastion in the depths of Blackreach. There, they discovered something ancient and terrible, the Dark Heart, an artifact of unimaginable power, a twisted mirror of the lost heart of Shor. Using the power of the heart, the Night Hollow terrorized the surface world above. The Reach folk knew them as the Night Lords, and for centuries, the Reach suffered under the rule of these dark masters. Yet eventually, the clan was deprived of the power of the heart, and their influence began to wane. After the Night Hollow was severed from the heart's power, they gradually turned mindless and feral, blindly walking the depths of Blackreach as shells of their former selves. More than 1,500 years would pass before the Land of Skyrim finally re-entered the pages of history, and by this time, the ancient Nordic Empire had long faded into memory. But the next threat to the land of the Nords came not from the south, but from the north, as ships sailing under unknown banners crested the horizon. Little is known about the Akaviri, who hail from the mysterious eastern continent across the sea. It is thought that one of their people, the Sayesi, are said to be snake-like in appearance, with lifespans that dwarf those of ordinary men. Some also whisper that they are carnivorous, feeding upon the flesh of men, or drinking their life's blood. But in truth, we know little about them for certain. No direct depictions of them have survived the centuries, and the Sayesi in Tamriel are thought to be all but extinct. Yet in the year 2700 of the First Era, they would fall upon Skyrim in a bloody tide, seemingly without reason. The Nords were caught completely wrong-footed by this sudden assault. The Akaviri armies cut through them like a hot knife through butter. It is said that in High Rock, half the population of the Iliac Bay region was slaughtered by the marauding snake men, and it's not inconceivable to imagine that Skyrim suffered a similar fate. As the inevitable advance of the Akaviri continued, there was a moment where, in a grim irony, the Nords faced the possibility of being eradicated by invaders who had arrived from the northern seas. But the ambition of the Akaviri wasn't extermination, or even conquest. Legends say that the Sayesi were dragon hunters, and had already purged all of the dragons from their home continent. And they planned to continue their crusade in Tamriel. And to achieve these ends, they searched for the ultimate weapon to wield against their mortal enemies, a Dragonborn. After the Akaviri host cut through Skyrim, they crossed south over the Geralt Mountains into Cyrodiil. Across the border, the Colovian general Reman Cyrodiil had gathered a great host to face down the invaders at Pale Pass. Both sides prepared for a fierce battle, but upon hearing Reman speak, the Akaviri laid down their weapons and bowed at his feet. For Reman had the blood of Alessia in his veins, and the Akaviri recognized him as Dragonborn. Kneeling before him, they pledged themselves to his service, becoming his Dragon Guard, his elite soldiers and advisors. With the Dragon Guard leading his armies, Reman would launch a series of conquests which would bring all of Tamriel outside of Morrowind under his rule. The Second Empire had begun. It's not exactly clear how Skyrim became integrated into Reman's empire. But with their armies decimated by the Akaviri, and Reman's combined forces massed just across the Geralt Mountains, the Jarls of Skyrim would have been wise to bend the knee. What's more, Reman was a Dragonborn, a birthright which is revered in Nordic culture, and might grant him legitimacy as overlord over Skyrim. No matter how Skyrim was subjugated, it soon became an integral province of the Second Empire. Legions marched from Solitude into the lands of the Reach, whose warrior tribes resisted the rule of the new empire. The Reach was thus divided between the provinces of Skyrim and High Rock, but the Reachmen were never truly tamed, and legions would be repeatedly dispatched to put down rebellions. During this time, Skyrim would become home to one of the key institutions of the Second Empire, the Dragon Guard, originally formed by the Akaviri who pledged their lives to Reman, who would eventually become the Blades of the Septim Empire. High atop the Carved Spire, overlooking the mountains of the Reach, they raised the great fortress known as Sky Haven Temple. From here, they would range out across Tamriel, hunting down the remaining dragons one by one. At least 14 dragons were slain by the Dragon Guard in Skyrim, and by the end of the Second Empire, the dragons of Tamriel were but a distant memory. Though they persisted elsewhere, in the wild regions of Tamriel, most assumed them to be extinct. Although the Second Empire burned bright, it would not last for long. After less than 200 years, the last of the Reman dynasty died out, and the stewardship of the empire was taken over by the Akaviri advisor, Versailles Shay. Thus began the Second Era, and a period known as the Akaviri Potentate, when the Sayesi ruled over an empire without an emperor. But when Versailles Shay's successor, Severian Chorak, was assassinated by the Dark Brotherhood in the year 2 E430, central authority collapsed, and the provinces began to break away. This led to a chaotic period known as the Interregnum, when a whole array of kings and rulers would vie for dominance over Tamriel. And in Skyrim, the fall of the Second Empire was accompanied by another crisis. In the year 2E431, scarcely a year into the Empire's collapse, High King Logrulf of Skyrim was assassinated under mysterious circumstances. The king left an heir, his daughter Freydis, but her claim to the throne was challenged by Svarta, Jarl of Solitude, who claimed she was an illegitimate child. In a great moot, the Jarls were split, and so the kingdom of Skyrim was divided. Svarta was declared High King of the West, ruling from Solitude, while Freydis was recognized as High Queen of the East, reigning in the ancient capital of Windhelm. The Interregnum is remembered as a time of darkness in Tamriel, one described by the poet Trezesis as days and nights of blood and venom. With the Imperial throne empty, various factions would try to exert their influence over the continent, vying to fill the power vacuum that had been left in the Heartland. High Queen Freydis tried to expand her kingdom into Cyrodiil, though she was unable to hold these lands permanently. But in the year 2E533, a new conqueror would rise in the mountains of the Reach, one who would soon make all of Tamriel tremble at the sound of his name: Durkarak, the Black Drake. Durkarak was born to a tribe of Reachmen in the Druidak Mountains, and soon rose to become the chieftain of his clan. By the year 2E527, he had brought all the tribes of the Reach under his heel, with more than 10,000 warriors under his command. Some whisper that he communed with the witch covens of the Reach, and struck dark bargains with the Daedra to increase his power. 2 years later, his army marched out of the Reach in full force, spilling over the Gerald Mountains into the divided lands of Cyrodiil. The lords of Cyrodiil were caught completely off guard. Never before had the Reachmen sallied forth from their homeland in such force, and despite their supposed savagery, they proved to be fierce and capable warriors, more than a match for people who were supposedly more civilized. Barely 6 years after his rise to power in the Reach, the Black Drake had seized the Imperial city and had himself declared Emperor of Cyrodiil. This would begin a series of Reachman rulers who would become known to history as the Longhouse Emperors. But although Durkarak was dismissed by many as a savage, he did have some respect for the traditions and grandeur of the Empire. To try and legitimize his claim, he married Varaxia Tharn, a Nibonese noble, and tried to carry himself and his court in the style of an Imperial. But the Black Drake was restless, and could not sit still in his new capital for long. Soon, he launched another campaign of conquest, this time against the Bretons of High Rock. His forces rampaged through the province, reaching the gates of Daggerfall before the Black Drake was slain in single combat by the Breton High King, Emeric of Wayrest. With the Black Drake dead, his dynasty would soon follow, as the nobles of Cyrodiil rose up to overthrow their foreign rulers. But the fall of the Longhouse Emperors would not bring an era of peace, as many had hoped. Rather, it was simply the prelude for one of the greatest wars in Tamriel's history, and one in which Skyrim would play a crucial part. In the year 2E572, strange sails were once again sighted in the Sea of Ghosts, off Skyrim's northern coast. Another armada had sailed out of Akavir, this time comprised of the snow demons of Kamal, led by their king, Adasun Dir Kamal. Taking the Nords of eastern Skyrim by surprise, they soon began landing in force at the mouth of the White River, massing near the capital of Windhelm. Soon, the Nordic defenders were driven back behind the walls and forced to mount a desperate defense. One eyewitness of the battle recalled, "Queen Mabjarn and Princess Nirnhilda are dead. Nirnhilda led the Bloodclaws into combat when the gates of Windhelm fell. They fought like I have never seen anyone fight before, raging in perfect coordination. When the queen went down, the rage took over, though Nirnhilda donned the crown and tried to restore order to our lines. The Akaviri were driven from the city, but then they came back. Now Queen Nirnhilda is dead." For the kingdom of eastern Skyrim, this was an unprecedented disaster. Not only were the queen and her heir dead, but the capital was left a smoking ruin. Prince Joran barely escaped with his life, and was named High King to succeed his mother and sister. But the battered armies of Skyrim could not stop the relentless march of the Kamal. So in his rage and grief, Joran scaled the 7,000 steps, appealing to the Greybeards for aid. They taught him a word of power, one that would call forth a hero from Sovngarde to help the Nords in their time of need. And so mighty was Joran's shout that it summoned none other than Ysmir Wolfhearth back into the world. And at Joran's side, the Ash King would once more wade into battle for the sake of his people. The two Nordic heroes raised a mighty host and pursued the Kamal army over the mountains into Morrowind. There, in the volcanic wastes of Stonefalls, the Akaviri invaders were caught between the combined armies of the Nords and the Dunmer. But despite the odds, the invaders held their ground, and for a moment it seems as if they might rally and destroy the Nords and Dunmer both, until another army waged into the fray, to the surprise of all. 2 legions of Argonian shellbacks, under the command of Hayt charged into the Akaviri lines and shattered them beneath their weight. Then, the Dunmer god Vivek took to the field and summoned a great wave to wash away the last survivors of the Kamal. The second Akaviri invasion was over, and in its place, a new alliance was born. Relations between the Nords and the Dunmer had always been fraught, if not outright hostile, and it's well known that there was no love lost between the Dunmer and Argonians. So from the beginning, this was a fragile alliance. But in this time, Tamriel was a dangerous place. The heartland of Cyrodiil had fallen into chaos, and the other provinces had already coalesced into 2 power blocks. The Aldmeri Dominion, of Altmer, Bosmer, and Khajiit, and the Daggerfall Covenant, of Bretons, Orcs, and Redguards. These dangers convinced the Nords, Dunmer, and Argonians to put their differences aside, and in the year 2E572, the Ebonheart Pact was signed. This was a military alliance, not a political union, and the pact was governed by a great moot comprised of representatives from all 3 races. High King Joran was chosen as the leader of the moot, and vice-canons from each race were appointed to represent the interests of their respective peoples. Still, the difficult history between Nords, Dunmer, and Argonians meant that some of them refused to join the pact. The western holds of Skyrim, Morrowind's House Telvanni, and the Argonian tribes beyond Shadowfen and Thornmarsh all kept out of it. Yet while this new alliance had its ups and downs, it did prompt an unprecedented level of cultural exchange between the 3 races, as the memoirs of one Nord soldier recall. Our alliance was forged in the fires of adversity, a shield to protect us from all invaders. Our cultures differ, but our aims bind us. I have fought beside our allies in battle, and when I return home, I tell my children proud tales of victory over our foes, fighting with Dunmer and Argonians beside me. The pact never ceases to surprise me. I have spoken at great length with Argonian mystics, marvelling at their view of the world. I have walked in the caves of Dunmeri priests, staring at shadows as they tell me tales of their gods. The Ebonheart Pact would play an important role in the 3 Banners War, when they competed with the rival alliances of the Daggerfall Covenant and the Aldmeri Dominion to seize control of Cyrodiil. This war was fought across many theatres, but soon the competing factions were forced to put aside their differences in the face of a new threat. After the veil between Nirn and Oblivion was weakened by an event known as the Soul Burst, the Daedric Prince Molag Bal attempted an invasion of Tamriel. During this invasion, which became known as the Plane Meld, Molag Bal used giant Daedric constructs known as Dark Anchors to try and physically drag Nirn into his plane of Cold Harbour. Though Molag Bal's planes were eventually thwarted by a hero known as the Vestige, much of Tamriel was devastated by the fighting. The 3 Banners War would end inconclusively, and gradually, the Grand Alliances broke apart. By the 9th century of the Second Era, Tamriel was once again a fractured continent. This was a time of great violence and unrest, with dozens of petty powers competing for land and influence. The great empires of the past seemed like a distant memory. But that would all change with the birth of one man, who would go on to become perhaps the greatest figure in the history of Tamriel. For centuries, myths had prophesied the rise of a great hero. The ruling king, the heir of Akatosh, the dragon of the north. And in the closing days of the Second Era, this hero rose from obscurity to change the face of Tamriel forever. He has been known by many names: Hjalti, Ismir, Tiber Septim, but to the Nords he will always be Talos Stormcrown, born of the north, the breath of winter given fall. There are two competing narratives about Talos' origins. The official histories claim that he was born in Atmora before migrating to Skyrim in his youth, where he trained in the arts of war and the voice. Yet others believe that he was a Breton, not a Nord, born under the name Hjalti on the Isle of Alcair in High Rock. But to the Nords, such details are unimportant. What matters is not the circumstances of a man's birth, but his deeds. And his deeds would not only reshape the land of Tamriel, but even the very heavens themselves. As a young man, Talos entered the service of Cuchulainn, the ambitious king of Falkreath, who sought to claim the imperial throne of Cyrodiil. Cuchulainn's conquests took him to the Reach, where he besieged the formidable fortress of Old Hroldan. It was thought that the Reachmen's position was unassailable, but centuries later, the ghost of an old soldier would recount what happened next. That night, a storm came and visited Hjalti's camp. It spoke with him in his tent. At dawn, Hjalti went up to the gate, and the storm followed just above his head. Arrows could not penetrate the winds around him. He shouted down the walls of Old Hroldan, and his men poured in. At the age of 20, Talos had already won a great victory, and cemented his reputation as a formidable warrior and general. But his rise to power was only just beginning. From their seclusion on High Hrothgar, the Greybeards heard the earth shake beneath Talos' shouts. And soon they decided to summon him to the throat of the world to meet his destiny. Soon the Greybeards made known that they were restless. Already the storms had begun from their murmurs. The Greybeards were going to speak. The surrounding villages were abandoned as the people fled the coming blast. The villagers warned Talos to turn back, for he was marching to the mountain where the Greybeards dwelt. Inside he went, and on seeing him they removed their gags. When they spoke his name, the world shook. The tongues of Skyrim told the son of Atmora that he had come to rule Tamriel, and that he must travel south to do so. With his path clear before him, Talos returned to lead the armies of Cuchulainn, marching south over the Gerel Mountains into the Colovian highlands of Cyrodiil. Cuchulainn's ambition was to seize the imperial throne and put an end to the Interregnum, and soon Talos had pacified all of the Colovian estates in the name of his lord. But this rapid expansion alarmed many of the nobles of Skyrim and High Rock, who formed an army to put an end to the upstart Cuchulainn and his young general. This Nord-Breton army crossed south into Cyrodiil and took up a defensive position at the ancient fortress city of Sancre Tor. What happened next was a masterclass in strategy. Talos sent his army in a frontal attack on the citadel, while he scaled down the mountains behind it, accompanied by a small force of elite soldiers. As the battle raged outside the walls, Talos and his band of warriors swept into the citadel from the rear, surprising the occupants and capturing all of the Nord and Breton nobles. With their leadership in chains, the rest of the Nords and Bretons surrendered and bent the knee to Talos. The Nordic veterans acquired during this campaign would become the core of Talos' army, loyal to the death. But during the Battle of Sancre Tor, the young general would receive an even greater boon. After the fighting was done, he descended into the depths of the ruins, finding the Amulet of Kings buried in the tombs of the Reman emperors. With this relic in hand, many began to whisper that Talos, not Cuchulainn, should be the one to ascend the ruby throne as emperor. With all opposition within Cyrodiil broken, Cuchulainn soon took the imperial city. But before the king of Falkreath could be crowned as emperor, disaster struck. A Breton Nightblade crept into the palace and murdered the would-be emperor. In the struggle, the imperial palace was set ablaze. Talos managed to kill the assassin, but suffered a wound to his throat in the process. The aftermath of this moment has gone down in legend. But from the smouldering ruin he came, one hand to his neck, and with Cuhlakain's crown in the other. The legions wept at the sight. His northern magic had saved him, but the voice that led them would be more silent from that night on. His word could no longer rout an army with a roar, but he could still command one with a whisper. He took for himself a Cyrodiilic name, Tiber Septim, and the Nordic name of kings, Izmir, the Dragon of the North. And with those names he took too, the red diamond crown of the Cyrodiils, and became their true emperor. Still, there are some who whisper that the timing of Cuhlakain's death was convenient, and that Talos himself may have chosen to murder his lord. But regardless, Cuhlakain was dead, and his mantle fell to the Dragon of the North. After his death, Cuhlakain was heralded by Talos as Emperor Zero, the man who paved the way for his ascent. And no matter how he met his end, his role in the rise of Talos makes him one of the most pivotal figures in Tamriel's history. With the Nords and Bretons already subjugated, Tiber Septim soon turned his sights towards new conquests. The Redguard homeland of Hammerfell was sundered by a vicious civil war between two factions, the Crowns and the Forebears. Taking advantage of this division, the new emperor signed a treaty with the Forebears, where they agreed to join the Empire if Talos supported them in the civil war. The Crowns resisted valiantly, but were eventually forced to retreat to the island of Strosmakai, where their fleet was smashed by a force under the command of Tiber's dragon general, Nefala Largus. Now, with all the human realms under his command, Tiber's armies washed over the rest of Tamriel in a bloody wave. Valenwood and elsewhere fell in quick succession, as did the outer regions of Blackmarsh. The invasion of Morrowind proved more difficult, as it was defended by the three living gods known as the Tribunal. But unknown to the outside world, the power of the Tribunal gods was waning. After the sacking of Mournhold by Tiber's legions, the war in Morrowind was ended by the Armistice, a peace treaty which saw Morrowind join the Empire while retaining limited autonomy. As part of this agreement, the living god Vivec gifted Tiber Septim the Numidium, the giant brass golem built by the Dwemer, which was once powered by the Heart of Shore. Using a giant soul gem known as the Mantella, the Numidium was activated at the halls of Colossus in Elsewhere, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. The giant golem stomped its way toward the Somerset Isles, the last power in Tamriel which resisted Imperial rule. The Altmer fleet was smashed, and their capital of Alinor fell in less than an hour. Though the Numidium was lost after the Tiber Wars, for the first time, the armies of men raised their banners over the Altmer homeland, and all of Tamriel had been united under the rule of a single man. And throughout these conquests, Tiber was accompanied by his loyal Nordic legionaries, who soon began to see their leader not as a general, or even as an emperor, but as a god in the flesh. Under Tiber Septim's rule, the Third Empire of Cyrodiil would enjoy a golden age. He rebuilt the Imperial city, finding it a city of ruins and leaving it a city of marble. It's even said that dragons became a common sight over the skies of the capital. Some believe that he used his divine power to reshape the land of Cyrodiil itself. His sacred breath transformed the dense jungles of Cyrodiil into a green and temperate land, and he gifted it to his legions, saying, "You have suffered for me to win this throne, and I see how you hate jungle. Let me show you the power of Talos Stormcrown, born of the north, where my breath is long winter. I breathe now in royalty, and reshape this land which is mine. I do this for you, Red Legions, for I love you." For almost 4 decades, Tiber Septim would rule over his new empire, before he finally passed away at the age of 108. It is said that when he took his last breath, his soul ascended to Aetherius, and the 8 divines became 9. Still, there are some who whisper that the traditional story of Talos is simply imperial propaganda, masking a darker truth. The Arcturian heresy claims that the deeds of Talos were not the work of one man, but 3. The general, Hjalti Earlybeard, the battle mage, Zurin Arctus, and Ysmir Wolfhearth, who had returned from the dead once more as the Under-King. Eventually, Zurin and Ysmir destroyed each other, allowing Hjalti to claim the mantle of Talos, reigning under the name of Tiber Septim. But again, death could not hold Ysmir forever, and the heresy claims that he would return once more. Tiber Septim is succeeded by his grandson, Pelagius I. Pelagius is just not of the same caliber. In truth, he's a little nervous with all these provinces. Then an advisor shows up. "I was friends with your grandfather," the Under-King says. "He sent me to help you run the Empire." Whatever the truth behind the ascent of Talos and his association with Wolfhearth, his reign would begin a golden age in Tamriel. For more than 100 years, Skyrim would enjoy a period of peace and prosperity as one of the integral provinces of the Third Empire. Nordic loyalty to the Empire was strong. The Nords venerated Talos as their patron god, the heir of Shor, and saw his descendants as their rightful rulers. And Nordic loyalty wasn't just paid in words and oaths, it was proven in sweat and blood. Throughout the Septim Empire, Nordic warriors would form the core of the Imperial legions, providing some of its most seasoned warriors. But under the rule of the Septims, the culture of Skyrim would gradually become more imperialized. The Empire administered the province from the City of Solitude, and the East Empire Company brought exotic goods to the cold harbours of the north. The old Nordic pantheon began to fall out of favour. Kyne became Kinnereth, Stune became Stendar, and the name of Shor was now little more than an old legend. For a time, it seemed as if imperial power was here to stay for good. However, as the Septim dynasty entered its second century in power, a new figure would arise who would shake the empire to its core. A daughter was born to Emperor Pelagius II, and the infant was said to be so fierce that she was described as a she-wolf ready to pounce. Her name was Potema, and soon this child began to terrorize the court of the imperial city, picking locks, stealing artifacts, and even blackmailing members of the court. At the age of 14, she was sent away, married to the elderly King Mantiarco of Solitude to cement a political alliance. It would have been easy for Potema to become just a footnote in history, but she proved to be a shrewd politician and began to cement her hold over Solitude. She gave birth to a son, whom she named Uriel, and once her husband passed away, she ruled the city in her son's name. But the throne of Solitude was not the end of Potema's ambitions. It was merely a stepping stone. Once her father died, and her brother Antiochus was declared emperor, Potema quietly began to build alliances with the kings of High Rock and Morrowind in preparation for a bid for the throne. In this time, she earned a reputation as a fearsome leader and a powerful sorcerer, winning her the moniker of the Wolf Queen of Solitude. Antiochus ruled the empire for 13 years before suddenly passing away. Potema and her son happened to be in the imperial city at the time, and some whisper that she weaved a dark spell to cause her own brother's death. Regardless of how Antiochus died, Potema quickly moved to challenge the succession. Before the imperial council itself, she accused Antiochus's daughter Kintyra of being a bastard, born from an affair between the empress and the captain of the guard. If true, this would make Potema's son, Uriel, the last true-born heir of the Septim dynasty. The Elder Council considered Potema's claims, but ultimately dismissed them, raising Kintyra to the imperial throne as Empress Kintyra II. Enraged, Potema fled back to Solitude and began to gather an army under her son's banner before declaring him as Emperor Uriel III. Thus, the empire was divided, with Potema and her allies supporting Uriel III, and imperial loyalists led by the generals Sepphoris and Magnus rallying around Empress Kintyra II. This civil war would be known as the War of the Red Diamond, and Skyrim would be at the eye of the storm. The entire north of Tamriel was soon plunged into war, with battles fought across Skyrim, Morrowind, and High Rock. But soon, Empress Kintyra was captured during a battle in Iliac Bay, becoming the Wolf Queen's prisoner. Empress Kintyra died in captivity, presumably murdered by Potema. With their empress dead, the loyalist faction's morale was broken, and they lost ground to Potema's forces. Soon, the rebel forces seized the imperial city itself, and Potema had her son placed on the ruby throne as Emperor Uriel III. But the murder of Kintyra made the new regime wildly unpopular. Though Potema and Uriel held the imperial city, most of Tamriel now opposed their rule. Only Skyrim and parts of High Rock and Morrowind remained in their grasp. Potema's brothers, Sepphoris and Magnus, retreated and rallied the resisting forces, and they soon began to turn the tide of the war against the usurping emperor and his mother. Uriel led an army into Hammerfell to face his uncle Sepphoris, but he was decisively defeated and taken prisoner. Sepphoris resolved to take his nephew to the imperial city to stand trial, but Uriel's caravan was stormed by an angry mob, and he was burned alive. Now, with both claimants to the imperial throne dead, the loyalists rallied around Sepphoris, and he was hailed as the new emperor. When news reached the Wolf Queen, it would have dire consequences. When Sepphoris was proclaimed emperor, Potema's fury was terrible to behold. She summoned Daedra to fight for her, had her necromancers resurrect her fallen enemies as undead warriors, and mounted attack after attack on the forces of the Emperor Sepphoris I. Her allies began leaving her as her madness grew, and her only companions were the zombies and skeletons she had amassed over the years. The Kingdom of Solitude became a land of death. Stories of the ancient Wolf Queen being waited on by rotting skeletal chambermaids and holding war plans with vampiric generals terrified her subjects. It took the new emperor almost a decade to grind down Potema's Dark Legions. In the year 3E137, the war would culminate in the Siege of Solitude. By the time the Imperial forces broke into the Blue Palace, they found it had become a charnel house, filled with undead and rotting corpses. And when they entered the Wolf Queen's chambers, they found that she was already dead, her lifeless face stretched into a sickening smile. The tainted palace was razed to the ground, with a new one built atop its ruins. With Potema dead and her line extinguished, Emperor Sepphoris installed the young Pelagius Septim III as the new ruler of Solitude. But legend has it that even in death, Potema continued to haunt the Septim bloodline. Only a few years after her demise, Emperor Sepphoris died in a freak accident after his horse bolted from under him. And when Pelagius eventually inherited the imperial throne, it soon became clear that his mind had been tainted by madness. Some believe that Potema's spirit had infested the Blue Palace, slowly turning Pelagius mad, or that in the guise of a kindly old woman, she had gifted Pelagius a cursed amulet which slowly warped his mind. Regardless of the cause, Emperor Pelagius III soon lost his grip on reality. It was said that when the Argonian ambassador from Blackrose came to the court, Pelagius insisted on speaking in all grunts and squeaks, as that was the Argonians' natural language. It is known that Pelagius was obsessed with cleanliness, and many guests reported waking to the noise of an early morning scrub-down of the imperial palace. When Pelagius began actually biting and attacking visitors to the imperial palace, it was decided to send him to a private asylum. Kataraya was proclaimed regent 2 years after Pelagius took the throne. For the next 6 years, the emperor stayed in a series of institutions and asylums. On a warm night in Sunsdawn, in his 34th year, Pelagius III died after a brief fever in his cell at the Temple of Kinnereth in the Isle of Bethany. After the death of Pelagius and the ascent of Kataraya to the imperial throne, the empire would stabilize and enter a new period of peace and prosperity. During this time, the city of Solitude once again became a major imperial center and an important outpost for the East Empire Company and the Imperial Navy. For the next 2 centuries, this would remain the status quo, and though there were the usual squabbles among the Jarls, the realm was largely at peace. But towards the end of the Third Era, the Empire would be plunged into crisis once again, and the fires of war would spread out across the north. Emperor Uriel VII ascended the throne in the year 3E368. He was said to be a wise and noble ruler, but he made one fatal mistake, placing his trust in the wrong man. In the year 3E389, the Emperor was betrayed by his closest advisor, Imperial battle mage Jaegar Tharn. Tharn imprisoned the Emperor in a pocket realm of oblivion, using dark magic to mimic the Emperor's appearance, and ruling the Empire in his name. This era of misrule became known as the Imperial Simulacrum, and would continue for a decade before the rightful Emperor was restored by the hero known as the Eternal Champion. During the chaos of the Simulacrum, numerous wars broke out across Tamriel, with some even stoked by Tharn himself. In the north, Skyrim would fight Hammerfell and High Rock in a conflict known as the War of the Bendermark. The armies of the Nords came out on top, seizing a large section of the Western Reach, as well as the cities of Elenhir and Johanna. But the war wasn't completely one-sided. The Nordic city of Snowhawk was all but wiped off the map by an army of Red Guards and Orcish mercenaries. Most of the survivors fled to Solitude or Whiterun, and the city was never rebuilt. By the time of the Fourth Era, only a crumbled fort remained in its place. After the rightful emperor was reinstated, order was restored to the region, and conquered territories were returned to their rightful owners, and the next 3 decades would be quiet and peaceful. Some even began to call this period a new golden age. But Uriel VII's stewardship masked deeper problems beneath the surface, and soon a new crisis would rear its head, one that not only threatened the Empire, but every mortal soul in Tamriel. Much has been said about the Oblivion Crisis, the disaster which brought an end to the Septim dynasty. It began when the Daedric cult known as the Mythic Dawn assassinated Uriel VII and all his trueborn heirs. Without one of the dragon blood to wear the Amulet of Kings, the dragon fires flickered out. The liminal barriers between Nirn and Oblivion were weakened, allowing the Daedric legions of Mehrunes Dagon to swarm into the mortal plane. The story of the crisis in Cyrodiil is well known. Less has been written about its effects in Skyrim, but the war in the north was no less disastrous. From Falkreath to Windhelm, the land was besieged by armies of marauding Daedra, and the old holds in the east were devastated. Few details of this catastrophe have been handed down to us, and we have no contemporary accounts of the Oblivion Crisis from the Nordic perspective. But we can make a few assumptions based on what we can see in the Fourth Era. For example, Third Era maps of Skyrim feature settlements such as Snowhawk, Nemalton, and Blackmoor. But by the Fourth Era, these towns and cities have literally been wiped off the map, possibly casualties of the invading Daedric legions. In the current age, no ruins of Oblivion Gates remain in Skyrim. It's possible that they have been destroyed by the survivors to try and erase any remnant of the Daedra. But while the physical effects of the invasion were devastating, its psychological effects may have been even more long-lasting. Over the centuries, the Nords had become increasingly skeptical of magic, and the Oblivion Crisis further reinforced this suspicion. The militant order known as the Vigilance of Stendar was founded in response to the crisis. These crusaders were dedicated to eradicating what they called the Four Abominations: Daedra, vampires, witches, and werewolves. By the Fourth Era, they had established a strong presence in Skyrim, patrolling the roads and hunting down abominations wherever they found them. The perpetrators of the Oblivion Crisis, the cult known as the Mythic Dawn, were rooted out without mercy. One group of vigilantes seized Mehrunes' razor from a group of cultists and decided the weapon was too dangerous for any individual to possess. Calling themselves the Keepers of the Razor, the group broke the ancient artifact into 3 fragments, passing them down from generation to generation, so that the blade of Mehrunes Dagon could never again be used to wreak destruction on Tamriel. The Oblivion Crisis was a crushing blow to the Septim Empire. After Martin Septim sacrificed himself to slam shut the gates of Oblivion, the imperial throne was left without an heir. The line of Tiber Septim was dead, and there was no clear successor. High Chancellor Okato took the reins of the Elder Council and struggled to hold the fracturing empire together. But after Okato's sudden assassination, probably at the hands of the Thalmor, the Empire was plunged into a period of chaos that became known as the Stormcrown Interregnum. Central power collapsed, and one by one, the provinces of the Empire began to break free. Somerset, Valenwood, Elsewhere, Blackmarsh, Morrowind, all declared independence or otherwise slipped from Imperial control. But not Skyrim, for the land of the Nords was also the land of Talos. The Nords didn't see themselves as just another province of the Empire. They believed they were essential to its existence. Without the Nords, the Septim Empire would never have been founded in the first place. So for the Nords, abandoning the Empire was unthinkable. Although Imperial power in the province waned, Skyrim still stayed loyal. By the time the upstart Mede dynasty had consolidated power in Cyrodiil, Hammerfell, High Rock, and Skyrim were the only provinces remaining under Imperial control. The Empire had ceased to be a cosmopolitan, continent-spanning polity. Instead, it was a human empire, uniting all the kingdoms of men under a single banner. It was a lesser power than it had been under the Septims, but although it had been knocked down, it still had life in it yet. So what did Skyrim look like during the Fourth Era? Well, it seems that the land of the Nords is living in the shadow of its past glories. It is a wild land, filled with crumbling ruins and abandoned cities from a whole range of civilizations. The ancient Nords, the Dwemer, the Empire. Many of these ruins have become havens for bandits and outlaws, and the roads have become dangerous for travelers. Imperial power has withered, and the Empire's forts have fallen into disrepair, with the red banner of the Legion becoming a rarer sight on the roads of Skyrim. As centralized authority shrank away, power became increasingly concentrated in the hands of the Nordic Jarls, with each ruling their hold as their own feudal domain. While some cities, such as Whiterun, flourished under the stewardship of their Jarls, others were not so fortunate. The city of Riften had been a thriving city and an affluent trading hub, but it soon fell on hard times in the Fourth Era. For over 40 years, Hosgun ruled Riften with a black heart and an iron fist. He imposed ridiculous taxes upon his subjects and any merchants that wished to sell their wares within the city walls. Hosgun kept most of the coin for himself, using it to construct a massive wooden castle with unnecessarily lavish quartering within. The castle took 7 years to build and became a visual reminder of the people's oppression, which earned it the nickname Hosgun's Folly. Towards the end of his reign, the streets of Riften became littered with refuse and its people plagued by disease and hunger. Then, in 4E129, the people had finally had enough. With their numbers, they were able to temporarily overwhelm the city guard long enough to set Hosgun's Folly on fire with the greedy Jarl still within. As the fighting recommenced, the fire spread through the city unchecked. By the morning, the people had emerged victorious, but not without great cost. Most of the city was now in ruins, and many had died. Though the city of Riften was gradually rebuilt, it was a pale imitation of its vibrant past. Now, Riften is a haven for criminals of all stripes, and while the Jarl may rule in name, the real power lies with the corrupt Blackbriar family. Riften's fall from grace is a cautionary tale of what the rule of feudal lords can lead to. In this system, power is a lottery, and all it takes is one bad ruler to undo generations of progress. The Fourth Era is a time of turmoil in Tamriel, and this has caused whole populations to become uprooted across the continent. As a result, Skyrim has become home to groups of refugees fleeing violence and disaster. The majority of them came from Morrowind after the 5th year of the Fourth Era, when the Dark Elf homeland was struck by the cataclysm known as the Red Year. This disaster began when the moon of Bardau fell on the city of Vivec, causing earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions to decimate the land. The island of Vardenfell was almost completely obliterated, and what had been the holy city of Vivec became a boiling sea known as the Scathing Bay. This catastrophe was seized upon by the Argonians, the long-running enemies of the Dunmer, who swarmed into southern Morrowind in a surprise invasion. With Morrowind in ruins, whole communities of Dunmer were driven from their homes. Some chose to make the dangerous crossing through the Velothi Mountains into Skyrim, and many froze and died in the high passes. Yet although the Nords and Dunmer were ancestral rivals, the Jarls of Skyrim opened their borders to the Dunmer in their time of need. This show of solidarity is memorialized by the monument at Refugees' Rest. Let it stand in honor of those who had the strength and spirit to accept Skyrim's offer, untithed to any thane or hold, and self-governed with free worship, with no compensation to Skyrim or the Empire except as writ in the Armistice of old, wheresoever those might still apply, and henceforth let no man or mer say that the sons and daughters of Kine are without mercy or honor. In a surprising move, the High King of Skyrim even gifted the island of Solstheim to the Dunmer. For centuries, sovereignty of the island had been disputed between Skyrim and Morrowind. While a noble gesture, in truth, the king's motives weren't entirely altruistic. Dunmer refugees were already living on the island, along with a garrison of Redoran guards, so this was more of an acknowledgement of existing political reality. It also served as a way to redirect the influx of Dunmer away from mainland Skyrim. While Solstheim is a harsh, bleak environment, the Dunmer would gradually rebuild Raven Rock into a thriving colony. But elsewhere in Skyrim, the Dunmer refugees experienced a hostile reception. In Windhelm, they were crowded into a slum on the eastern side of the city, which soon earned the nickname of the Grey Quarter. Some Nords resented living alongside these newcomers, and there was widespread hatred and discrimination of the Dark Elves. The following text shows the attitude that prevailed among some Nords. To think that the city of Ysgramor, whose very name was made in driving out the elves from our sacred home, would open itself as a welcome destination for any refugee from the smoking sulphur is a disgrace to the very idea of being a Nord. And what has become of this? Predictably, the lazy, discontented rabble has descended into squalor in an area now delicately referred to as the Grey Quarter of the city. They were not expected to contribute, and so have not. That the attempt to make over a proud Nord city into a little pocket of Morrowind is insulting enough, but the amount of unrest they have provoked even within the proper city walls should give any other Jarl reason to fear. Yet despite the prejudice they faced, some of the Dunmer chose to stay in Skyrim, even as the situation in Morrowind began to stabilise. For many, it became their home, putting down roots and building new lives alongside their Nordic neighbours. But they did not abandon their heritage. From the new Nice's Corner Club in Windhelm to the new temple in Raven Rock, the Dunmer brought a little bit of Morrowind with them, wherever they went. But the Dark Elves of Morrowind were not the only group of displaced people to flock to Skyrim. For in the early 4th era, the Orcish city of Orsinium was sacked by a combined force of Bretons and Redguards, leading to many refugees fleeing east across the Druidak Mountains. There have been orcs in Skyrim since as early as the 1st era, and during the 2nd, there was even an Orcish kingdom established in the region of Falkreath. But by the 4th era, these Orcish tribes were confined to a few scattered strongholds in the mountains. The new wave of arrivals swelled the ranks of the Orcish fortresses in Skyrim, and new strongholds such as Largashpa were either established or refounded. These orcs were treated with suspicion by the Nords, and for their part, the orcs treat outsiders with the same skepticism, closing their doors to strangers. Still, outsiders who perform a great service for the orcs may earn the title of Bloodkin, granting them the right to be treated as an honorary member of the clan. As the 4th era dragged on, Skyrim would continue to endure a time of troubles, and it would soon face a disaster so great it practically wiped one of the province's most ancient cities off the map. Winterhold was once a noble city with an illustrious history. It was said that in ancient times, the Archmage Shalador built it with a whispered spell. For a long time, it was even the capital of Skyrim, and ranked among Windhelm and Solitude as one of the province's most important centres. It was also home to the College of Winterhold, one of the most significant magical institutions in Tamriel. But in the year 4E122, this would all change in the course of a single night. Savos Aren, Archmage of the College of Winterhold, was a witness to this tragedy.
The Sea of Ghosts practically came alive. No one was expecting it. Monstrous waves battered the shore for weeks on end. Winterhold was ancient and weathered, but it couldn't withstand the sea's fury. Entire districts of the city were lost overnight. The waves receded in time, but the damage was irreversible. Most residents of Winterhold abandoned what was left of the city. The college survived, and so here we remain.
When asked about the cause of the collapse, the Archmage would say,
No one is sure of the cause. Some believe the eruption of Red Mountain had far-reaching consequences that were only felt years later. I know there are some who have blamed the college, said that we were responsible. I assure you this is not the case.
Whatever the cause, the consequences of the collapse were disastrous. Practically the entire city of Winterhold sank into the ocean, with only its southern district remaining intact. Even the Jarl's palace was swallowed up by the sea, and the city was reduced to little more than a longhouse, a tavern, and a few scattered homes. But the College of Winterhold stood tall, presumably protected by its magical wards. Yet instead of being a relief to the people of Winterhold, they viewed the college's survival with suspicion. Jarl Courier, the most recent leader of the remnants of Winterhold, even went as far as to directly blame the college for the city's destruction. Yet more broadly, the Great Collapse contributed to a decline in trust in magic in Skyrim. This trend had been in motion for centuries, but as large numbers of Nords began to believe mages had destroyed one of their ancient cities, this suspicion only intensified. To make matters worse, the Imperial Mages Guild disappeared from Skyrim altogether, as the institution collapsed during the early Fourth Era. Long gone were the days of Azadal and Shalador. Now, magic was almost exclusively the preserve of court wizards in the service of the Jarls. For the common people of Skyrim, magic slowly became something alien and inscrutable. Their only interaction with it might be through a hedge wizard, the local alchemist, or a priest at the local temple. And save for the handful who were admitted to the College of Winterhold, magical instruction and education became all but inaccessible. In this section, we have seen how the Fourth Era saw a period of slow decline in Skyrim. But soon, news would arrive from the south of great unrest brewing abroad. For since the fall of the Septim dynasty, a new power had been rising in the south of Tamriel. In the year 4E22, a high elven faction known as the Thalmor had ousted the Altmeri monarchy in a coup, seizing control of the Somerset Isles and declaring a third Altmeri dominion. Their ambition was to shake off centuries of elven humiliation at the hands of human empires, restoring elven supremacy in Tamriel and bringing about a new Merethic era for the continent. Soon, the Thalmor extended their power to mainland Tamriel as they launched a coup in the Bosmer homeland of Valenwood. Lathaniel of Sunhold recalls the tactics the Thalmor used to overthrow imperial rule in the province. This short, savage campaign was won by the Thalmor even before First Blood was drawn. They waited and watched their enemy. They chose where and when they would attack. The Thalmor were able to bring the full fury of their small contingent of Altmer and Bosmer to any of several imperial strongholds. Contrary to the posturing of the Empire's generals, the Thalmor did not command greater numbers. They had better spies and greater mobility, and knew how best to use them. This is the menace that the Thalmor represent. They are cruel and merciless, but they are no fools. They are devious and subtle, and so very patient. This is the playbook that the Thalmor have used again and again, using subterfuge and manipulation to weaken their opponents and expand their power. Soon, they would set their sights on the Khajiit homeland of Elsewhere, and it was soon divided into the petty kingdoms of Anaquina and Palatine, which became vassals of the Dominion. This gave the Dominion a long northern border with Cyrodiil, stretching from Anvil in the west to Leyawiin in the east. Such an expanse was all but impossible to defend, and the soft underbelly of the Empire was left wide open. And soon, the Dominion would set their sights on the ailing Empire to their north. On the 30th of Frostfall, 4E171, the Thalmor sent an ambassador to the Imperial city in a covered cart, presenting the Emperor with an ultimatum. Their list of demands was dizzying. Staggering tributes, the disbandment of the Blades, the ceding of large sections of Hammerfell. But worst of all was the demand to outlaw Talos worship. The new emperor, Titus Mede II, was urged by his advisors to accept the demands, for the legions were in no state to fight. But the Emperor knew his rule could not survive such a humiliation, so he rejected the Thalmor's demands. The Thalmor ambassador then upended his cart, sending the heads of every Blades agent in Dominion territory spilling onto the floor of the Imperial Palace. So began the Great War, the most destructive conflict to shake Tamriel in an age. The Thalmor opened the war with a lightning strike, pouring across the borders and attacking Hammerfell and Cyrodiil simultaneously. The legions struggled to mount an effective response, and soon the Empire was in full retreat on all fronts. But despite this, young Nords flocked to join the Legion in its struggles, and the Empire's ranks began to swell with these recruits. And among them was a young idealist of noble origin, who had left his birthright as heir of Windhelm to follow in the footsteps of his hero Talos, and study the secrets of the voice on High Hrothgar. When news reached him of war with the Dominion, he left the seclusion of the Greybeard's monastery, and journeyed south to join the fight. His name was Ulfric Stormcloak, and his experience in this conflict would have lasting consequences for his homeland. After a year of war, fresh legions from Skyrim bolstered the Imperial defense, but they weren't able to stop the march of the Dominion towards the Imperial city. The Imperial forces were scattered, and the young Ulfric Stormcloak was captured in the fighting. The Empire's capital was surrounded on three sides, and the Emperor was left with an impossible choice: to fight to the death or flee and abandon the city. While the 8th Legion fought a desperate and doomed rearguard action on the walls of the city, Titus II broke out of the city to the north with his main army, smashing through the surrounding Altmeri forces and linking up with reinforcements marching south from Skyrim under General Yona. Meanwhile, however, the capital fell to the invaders, and the infamous sack of the Imperial city began. The Imperial Palace was burned, the White Gold Tower itself looted, and all manner of atrocities carried out by the vengeful elves on the innocent populace. This was a crushing blow to Imperial prestige, but it was not the end for the Empire. For the wounded legions limped north, and regrouped with the support of reinforcements from Skyrim and Hammerfell. Then, they launched a coordinated attack on the occupied capital. It is said that the Emperor was wounded by an assassin shortly before the battle, and that a forgotten hero donned his armour to rally his troops and lead the charge. Thus began the Battle of the Red Ring, one of the largest battles in Tamriel's history. In the end, the legions would prove victorious, storming the Imperial city and defeating the Thalmor general Narafin. But this victory came at a heavy price, for the legions were badly bloodied, and much of the city lay in ruins. As this decisive battle had been raging, Ulfric Stormcloak had been languishing in the dungeons of the Thalmor. He was interrogated and tortured by the Thalmor emissary Elenwen, until he finally reached his limit. Ulfric broke under the pressure, and told the Thalmor everything they wanted to know. Elenwen then led him to believe that the information he had given up was crucial in the Thalmor capture of the Imperial city. The traumatized Ulfric was then allowed to escape, and it's clear that the Thalmor believed his freedom would suit their ends, as their secret dossier on him remarks. After the war, contact was established, and he has proven his worth as an asset. The so-called Markarth incident was particularly valuable from the point of view of our strategic goals in Skyrim, although it resulted in Ulfric becoming generally uncooperative to direct contact. Operational notes. Direct contact remains a possibility under extreme circumstances, but in general, the asset should be considered dormant. As long as the civil war proceeds in its current indecisive fashion, we should remain hands-off. After his escape, Ulfric made his way back to Imperial lines, and earned renown for his part in the Battle of the Red Ring. But his experience in captivity broke something inside Ulfric. The young idealist who ran away to join the Legion was dead, and a new, colder man was born in his place. Shortly after the Battle of the Red Ring, the Empire and the Dominion sat down at the negotiating table. Both sides were near exhaustion, and risked ruin if the fighting continued. In 4175, a peace deal known as the White Gold Concordat was signed. But as the terms of the treaty were announced, many in the Empire reacted with anger and disbelief. For these terms were almost identical to the Thalmor ultimatum that had preceded the war in the first place. It seemed like the legions had fought and died for nothing, that just as the Empire was beginning to turn the tide, the Emperor decided to give up. Worse still, the Red Guards of Hammerfell refused to honour the treaty, as it agreed to cede large portions of their territory to the Dominion. The war in Hammerfell continued for another 5 years, resulting in the Thalmor being pushed out by the Red Guards, and Hammerfell earning its recognition as an independent kingdom. For many in the Empire, this was proof that the legions could have fought on, and perhaps even finished off the Thalmor. Although the Emperor had agreed to terms to allow the Empire time to recover, to many, it seemed as if he had managed to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. And there were some who whispered that he was a traitor, little more than a Thalmor puppet warming the seat of the Imperial throne. After the war, Ulfric Stormcloak returned to Skyrim as an angry and embittered man. Like many veterans, he felt that the Empire had thrown away its chance at victory, instead choosing to sign a humiliating peace deal with the Dominion. In their mind, the Empire wasn't defeated on the battlefield. It was stabbed in the back by its own cowardly Emperor. But the greatest humiliation of the White Gold Concordat wasn't monetary tribute or territorial concessions. It was the ban on Talos worship. To the Nords, Talos was more than just one of the divines. He was one of them, born of the north, the breath of winter, the heir of Shor himself. His example proved that man could reach beyond mortality and ascend to something greater. But for the Thalmor, who held elven supremacy above all, it was unthinkable that a mere human could ever ascend to godhood. The Dominion didn't just want to defeat man physically, but also spiritually. So the prohibition on Talos worship was worse than a religious prescription. It was an attack on the very soul of the Nordic people. Soon, many disaffected veterans began to flock around Ulfric. Perhaps they saw him as a natural heir to Talos. After all, Ulfric had trained with the Greybeards and commanded the power of the voice. And soon, it was more than just veterans of the war. Many young, disaffected Nords rallied behind Ulfric's banner, and he soon commanded a sizable force of troops. These were the first Stormcloaks, the self-proclaimed sons and daughters of Skyrim, and soon they began to dream of a Skyrim free from Imperial rule. The Stormcloaks would make a name for themselves for their part in the Forsworn Rebellion in the Reach. The Reachmen had formed their own independent kingdom during the Great War, when the Empire had been too distracted to respond. By all accounts, their rule was relatively peaceful, and Reachmen and Nords lived side by side as equal subjects. Led by their king, Madenak, the Reachmen even began to appeal to the Empire for recognition as an official imperial province. To the deposed Jarl Hrolfdir of Markarth, this was unthinkable, and so he turned to Ulfric and his Stormcloak militia for aid. Ulfric agreed to retake Markarth for the Jarl, under one condition: Talos worship must be legalized in the Reach. The Reachmen were caught off guard by the Stormcloak onslaught, and Ulfric's forces soon stormed the city of Markarth. But this occupation soon turned sour, as the historian Arianus Arius recalls. Every official who worked for the Forsworn was put to the sword, even after they had surrendered. Native women were tortured to give up names of Forsworn fighters who had fled the city or were in the hills of the Reach. Anyone who lived in the city, Forsworn and Nord alike, were executed if they had not fought with Ulfric and his men when they breached the gates. "You are with us, or you are against Skyrim," was the message on Ulfric's lips, as he ordered the deaths of shopkeepers, farmers, the elderly, and any child old enough to lift a sword that had failed in the call to fight with him. This massacre would go down in infamy as the Markarth incident. The Reachmen who survived fled to the hills, reverting to the tribal ways of their ancestors, and became known as the Forsworn. Now, it should be noted that our account of the Markarth incident was written by an Imperial historian, who has a motive to cast Ulfric in a negative light. But it's clear that in the aftermath of this sack, Markarth was a traumatized city. The Jarls rely on the corrupt Silverblood family, who extort the local population and lock up political prisoners in Sidna Mine. The Forsworn continue to wage a brutal guerrilla war against their Nordic overlords, both within the walls of Markarth and in the hills and valleys of the Reach. And to this day, the Reach is still a land riven by violence, its rivers flowing red with blood. After Ulfric's forces retook Markarth and placed Jarl Hrolfdir back on the throne, the tide soon turned against the Stormcloaks. To appease Ulfric, Hrolfdir had promised to reinstate Talos worship in the city. However, the Thalmor soon got wind of this, and sent a petition to the Empire demanding them to act. The worship of Talos was a direct violation of the White Gold Concordat. If the Empire didn't crack down, they risked renewed war with the Dominion. It's possible that this could have been Ulfric's ultimate intention all along, to provoke conflict between the Empire and the Thalmor. But if so, he would be bitterly disappointed. Unwilling to risk another war so soon, the Empire acceded to the Thalmor demands, and Ulfric and many of his supporters were arrested. It seems that this incident prompted a renewed crackdown on Talos worship across Skyrim, as Alvor of Riverwood recalls.
When the Emperor was forced by the Thalmor to outlaw Talos worship, we didn't pay much attention to it when I was a boy. Everyone still had their little shrine to Talos. But then, Ulfric and his Sons of Skyrim started agitating about it. Sure enough, the Emperor had to crack down, dragging people off in the middle of the night. One of the main causes of this war, if you ask me.
The Markarth incident only made Ulfric and his supporters even more resentful of the Empire, and to many, his arrest made him a martyr for the cause of an independent Skyrim. During his imprisonment, his father, Jarl Hogue of Windhelm, passed away, and Ulfric was forced to deliver his father's eulogy through a letter he smuggled out of prison. When Ulfric was released in the year 4E183, he returned to Windhelm to take up his father's seat.
When finally set free, I returned to Windhelm and was greeted by a city in mourning, at one with my own grief and anger, clamoring in angry voices, calling out for justice, for war. They sat me on the throne of Ysgramor, the throne of my father. I only hope I can prove worthy of that honor.
More than ever, Ulfric was determined to resist both the Empire and the Thalmor. He turned his motley band of followers into an organized army who began to call themselves the Stormcloaks. He also began to look for allies among the other Jarls of Skyrim, earning the allegiance of Winterhold, Riften, and Dawnstar. As these fracture lines began to form, it seemed that Skyrim was on the brink of all-out civil war, and the spark that would start the fire would come when High King Islot of Skyrim died, and the Moot gathered to elect his successor. Islot had an obvious heir in his son Torrig, yet his succession was far from assured. After much debate, the Moot eventually agreed to elect Torrig as High King to succeed his father. However, Ulfric used the Moot to argue for Skyrim's independence from the Empire, in terms that came dangerously close to treason. Although Torrig remained loyal to the Empire, he apparently respected Ulfric for speaking out, and perhaps under different circumstances, the two men could have been allies, even friends. But alas, it was not to be. Torrig was raised to the throne of High King, and Ulfric went back to Windhelm, his ambitions for independence seemingly frustrated. Then, one day in the year 4E201, Ulfric arrived at the Blue Palace in Solitude, demanding an audience with Torrig. According to Sibyl Stentor, Torrig initially believed Ulfric had come to call for a moot, but by the time it became apparent that Ulfric intended to challenge him to a duel, High King Torrig had no choice but to accept. Refusing would have destroyed his reputation. No Nord would follow a king seen as a coward. But while it was brave for Torrig to meet this challenge, he was taking a terrible risk. Ulfric was a hardened war veteran, while Torrig was a young man who had probably never seen a real battle. And of course, Ulfric had a secret weapon on his side: the power of the voice. There are differing accounts of what really happened in this duel. The Stormcloaks and their supporters claim that Ulfric beat Torrig in fair combat, according to ancient Nord tradition. But Torrig's allies tell a different story. They claim that Ulfric used the voice to shout the High King apart. For his part, Ulfric claims that he shouted Torrig to the ground, then stabbed him through the heart with his sword. Whatever the case, the use of the Thu'um in such a duel was highly controversial. For some, it was proof of Ulfric's prowess and adherence to the old ways, whereas for others, using magic in a duel of arms seemed underhanded, even treacherous. But ultimately, the result of the duel was clear. The High King of Skyrim lay dead, slain in single combat by Ulfric's Stormcloak. The people of Solitude did not take kindly to the slaying of their High King, and Ulfric was forced to flee. He only managed to escape due to a sympathetic guard who opened the gate to let him out, a gesture that would cost the poor guardsman his head. When he made it back to Windhelm, Ulfric rallied the Stormcloaks under his banner, and declared himself the true High King. Back in Solitude, Torrig's supporters rallied around his widow, Jarl Elisif the Fair, and the Empire dispatched General Tullius to lead the legions in putting down the unrest. At last, the battle lines were drawn. The Stormcloak Rebellion had begun. Yet the Civil War was not the only crisis to strike Skyrim during the fateful year of 4E201. For centuries, the return of Alduin had been prophesied. After all, he had not been destroyed, only cast into the future through a wound in time. It was a matter of when, not if, he would re-emerge. Yet while most forgot the dragons, a few foretold their resurgence. The prophecy of the Dragonborn was said to have originated in an Elder Scroll. It was passed down over the centuries, before eventually being inscribed on Alduin's wall in the Great Blade's fortress of Skyhaven Temple. Foretelling times of trouble and the eventual return of Alduin, the prophecy reads, "When misrule takes its place at the 8 corners of the world, when the brass tower walks and time is reshaped, when the thrice-blessed fall and the red tower trembles, when the dragon-born ruler loses his throne and the white tower falls, when the snow tower lies sundered, kingless, bleeding, the world eater wakes and the wheel turns upon the last dragonborn." One by one, each line of the prophecy came to pass. The brass tower reshaped time during the warp in the west. The red tower trembled with the destruction of the heart of Lorkhan. The dragonborn emperors died with Martin Septim, and the white gold tower fell to the Dominion in the Great War. And now Skyrim lay bleeding, lost in the throes of civil war. Alduin's return was not just inevitable, it was imminent. On the eve of the return of the dragons, the Stormcloak Rebellion had escalated into a full-blown civil war. Windhelm, Riften, Dawnstar, and Windsorhold all declared for Ulfric, and the Empire's hold on the rest of the provinces was at best tenuous. To quell the uprising, Emperor Titus Mede II dispatched General Tullius to Skyrim to take charge of the Imperial legions and coordinate a response. But this was the limit of the Emperor's support. The legions were guarding the southern border with the Dominion, and could not be sent to Skyrim without leaving Cyrodiil wide open. Tullius would have to rely on a handful of veteran legionaries, and use local recruits to plug the gaps. Knowing that he risked becoming bogged down in a protracted war, Tullius chose to gamble. Without Ulfric, the rebellion's unity would crumble. What was needed was a swift, decisive decapitation strike. An ambush was set outside the settlement of Darkwater Crossing, in the south of Eastmarch. As Ulfric's entourage passed the village, the Imperials struck. Surrounded, Ulfric was forced to surrender, and he was taken into Imperial custody. It seemed as if the Stormcloak Rebellion might end before it could get off the ground. But fate would have different plans for Ulfric Stormcloak. The rebel leader was bound, his mouth gagged so he couldn't use the power of the voice. Then he was thrown in a cart and taken to the Imperial outpost of Helgen. But unbeknownst to all, Ulfric wasn't the most important captive in that cart, for among them was a nameless prisoner who would soon change the course of history. This brings our story full circle to the return of Alduin and the rise of the Dragonborn. In ancient times, the World Eater had strayed from his true purpose. He tried to rule the world when he was destined to end it. But he would not make the same mistake twice. High atop the throat of the world, Paarthurnax had waited. He had seen the world grow old and the ages turn, watching as the mortals of Nirn forgot the ancient terror on scaled wings. When the World Eater emerged from the time wound, he was not determined to conquer the world, but to destroy it, to start the Kalpic cycle anew. The two dragons dueled above the snow tower, but Paarthurnax alone could not stop him. The sky darkened, and the shadow of the World Eater descended on the Land of Skyrim. Far below, in the quiet mountain town of Helgen, the Imperials finally arrived with their prisoners, and began to carry out their bloody business. The prisoners were taken from the cart, and lined up to await the executioner's block. Ulfric Stormcloak himself was bound in chains, forced to watch his men killed one by one as he waited his turn. Alongside him, an unknown prisoner was marched to the chopping block, a nameless soul caught in the chaos of war. But before the axe could fall, the sky itself cracked open. Alduin fell upon Helgen like a force of nature. His words rent the sky, and fire came down like rain. Towers crumbled, homes burned, soldiers and rebels alike fled before his wrath. It was the end of Helgen and the beginning of the Dragon Crisis. For many Nords, this heralded the end of the world. The Stormcloaks and Imperials fought on, but their war became a sideshow, the spilled blood nothing more than fuel for Alduin's hunger. And with each soul lost, the World Eater grew stronger, his ambitions of destruction creeping ever closer to reality. And yet, through the fire and death, some escaped the chaos at Helgen. Ulfric and Tullius both emerged unscathed, fleeing back to marshal their armies for the coming war. The unknown prisoner fled the wreckage, emerging into the wilderness as something more than just a survivor. In time, they would come to Whiterun, seeking aid at the court of Jarl Balgruuf. But destiny had already woven its threads, and their fate was about to be revealed. For a new threat had arrived at Whiterun. The dragon Murmelnir, sweeping down upon the western watchtower. The unknown warriors stood among Whiterun's defenders, and against all odds, the dragon was brought crashing down. But when the beast fell, something impossible happened. The body of the dragon burned away, and its power surged through the veins of the unknown hero as they consumed the dragon's soul. The ancient power of the voice, the Thu'um, surged within them. And at that moment, the earth itself seemed to acknowledge their rise, for from the peaks of High Hrothgar, the Greybeards spoke for the first time since the rise of Talos. Their voices thundered across Skyrim, shaking the very bones of the mountains. They called for the one who had slain the dragon, for the one who had devoured its soul. In Skyrim's greatest time of need, the Dragonborn had returned, for the last time. Yet Alduin was no ordinary foe. He could not simply be killed, for his nature was eternal. As an entity bound to the cycle of the Kalpa, he existed beyond mere mortality, a force of divine destruction fated to end the world and begin it anew. Across Skyrim, the dead stirred from their graves, and the sleeping dragon priests began to wake. Alduin used his voice to raise the bones of dead dragons and return them to life, a secret of the voice known only to him. All across the land, the tongues of ancient dragons, silent for an age, roared back to life. And this time, they did not merely intend conquest, but to bring about the end times. The wheel of the Kalpa, the eternal cycle of destruction and rebirth, was turning once again, and it threatened to crush all beneath it. And yet the mortals of this age had grown weak, their knowledge of this old enemy long forgotten. The Empire was little more than a shell of its former self, and the Jarls of Skyrim were divided in civil war. The Blades, the sworn dragon hunters of old, were scattered and broken. It seemed as if even the gods themselves were silent. The last Dragonborn was the only being capable of standing against Alduin's apocalyptic ambitions. Under the watch of the Greybeards, the Dragonborn owned their mastery of the voice, learning powerful shouts that allowed them to slay Alduin's draconic allies and consume their souls. This not only strengthened the hero, but also ensured that Alduin could not resurrect his fallen kin, weakening his forces as the final battle loomed. However, despite their growing power, even the Dragonborn could not simply challenge Alduin head-on. To defeat him, they would need knowledge long lost to time. With the guidance of the ancient dragon Paarthurnax, the Dragonborn uncovered a long-forgotten weapon, Dragon Rend. Unlike any other word of power, this shout was created by mortals, designed to instill the concept of mortality into the otherwise immortal minds of dragons. With the power of an Elder Scroll, the Dragonborn looked into the past to learn the secret shout from the heroes of old. With this newfound power, the Dragonborn confronted Alduin atop the throat of the world, engaging him in a titanic battle alongside Paarthurnax. The Dragon Rend shout proved effective, forcing Alduin to the ground, and allowing the Dragonborn to fight him on equal footing. Yet, even with this advantage, Alduin would not fall. His nature as a being tied to the very fabric of existence made it impossible to destroy him outright on Mundus. Though wounded, he managed to flee, escaping to regain his strength. For a moment, it seemed like the Dragonborn's quest might have reached a dead end. Only Alduin's followers knew his hiding place. So to find it, they had to do the impossible: capture and interrogate a dragon. With the help of the Jarl of Whiterun, they tricked the dragon Dovahkiin into a trap at Dragon's Reach. Once he was trapped within the castle, the dragon revealed the World Eater's hiding place, the Nord afterlife of Sovngarde, where he feasted on the souls of the dead for power. There was only one way there, a portal atop the ancient dragon cult fortress of Skuldafn, high in the impassable peaks of the Velothi Mountains. After pledging allegiance to the Dragonborn, Dovahkiin flew the hero on his back to the World Eater's eyrie. After defeating the dragon priest Nakreen, the Dragonborn passed through the portal to Aetherius, becoming the first known mortal to ever set foot in the fabled world of Sovngarde. There, the Dragonborn found a land of mist, full of the souls of Nord warriors of old. They saw Alduin feasting upon the souls of the dead, growing stronger in preparation for his resurgence. In the halls of the honoured dead, the last Dragonborn met the three legendary Nord heroes, Gormlaith, Hakon, and Feldir, who had once banished Alduin using an Elder Scroll. Together, the warriors stood against the World Eater, wielding their voices in unison to clear the mists that cloaked Sovngarde and allowed Alduin to hide. The final battle was apocalyptic in its fire and fury. With the combined might of the ancient heroes and the last Dragonborn, Alduin was finally struck down. His body disintegrated, his essence seemingly torn apart. Yet unlike other dragons, Alduin's soul was not absorbed by the Dragonborn. This has led to speculation that he was not truly destroyed. His physical form may have been broken, but somewhere out there in the cosmos, his soul endures. The last Dragonborn had fulfilled their destiny. The World Eater was defeated, and the prophecy was realized. But the ending of Alduin's tale left as many questions as answers. If he was not truly gone, what did that mean for the world? Had the Dragonborn merely delayed the inevitable? Such uncertainties only deepen the mysteries surrounding Alduin, and it is likely that we will never truly know the answers. But Alduin was not the only ancient threat to re-emerge during this time. Far to the north, on the frozen island of Solstheim, settlers from the colony of Raven Rock began to vanish. They congregated around the island's standing stones, seemingly enthralled, and began to construct mysterious shrines around the stones. While they worked, they repeated a single mantra over and over.
Your eyes once were blinded. Now, through me, do you see? Your hands once were idle. Now, through them, do I speak. And when the world shall listen, and when the world shall see, and when the world remembers, that world will cease to be.
At the same time, the Dragonborn was ambushed by cultists wearing strange masks. After killing the cultists and finding a note on their bodies, the Dragonborn discovered they had come from the island of Solstheim. The Dragonborn boarded a ship known as the Northern Maiden and chartered passage to the distant island. After discovering the enthralled colonists, the Dragonborn investigated an ancient ruin located high in the mountains, which they soon discovered to be the ancient Temple of Merak. Descending to the depths of the ruin, the Dragonborn discovered a black book, one of the eldritch tomes of Hermaeus Mora. Upon opening the book, they were transported to Mora's realm of Apocrypha, where they were confronted by Merak for the first time.
You are Dragonborn. I can feel it. And yet, you have done little beyond killing a few dragons. You have no idea of the true power a Dragonborn can wield. This realm is beyond you. You have no power here. And it is only a matter of time before Solstheim is also mine. I already control the minds of its people. Soon they will finish building my temple, and I can return home. Send him back where he came from. He can await my arrival with the rest of Tamriel.
The Dragonborn was powerless against Merak and was cast out of Apocrypha. They would need to seek greater power in order to defeat the ancient dragon priest. Guided by the Skarl warrior Freya, the Dragonborn was brought to the village of the Skarl, where the shaman Storn advised them how to fight back against Merak. The Dragonborn cleansed the standing stones, freeing the enthralled colonists from Merak's grasp and loosening his hold over the island. The shaman revealed the source of Merak's power over the islanders, the dragon shout known as Bend Will, which he had learned from Hermaeus Mora. The shaman told the Dragonborn to seek the aid of Master Neloth, a Telvanni magister living on the island, who had been investigating the secrets of the Black Books. Neloth helped the Dragonborn track down another Black Book, allowing them to enter Mora's realm of Apocrypha once again. There, the Dragonborn came face to face with the Prince of Knowledge, and was offered a Faustian bargain. Mora would give them the words of the Bend Will Shout in exchange for the secrets of the Skarl. Returning to the Skarl village with this news, Shaman Storm reluctantly accepted the deal. The shaman allowed Mora to siphon the secrets of the Skarl from his mind, killing him in the process. Mora kept up his end of the bargain, and with the power of the Bend Will Shout, the Dragonborn was ready to face Marak at the summit of Apocrypha. This was a battle that had been millennia in the making, the first Dragonborn against the last, both at the peak of their powers. After a fierce battle, Marak was wounded and made a bid to escape. But at this moment, Hermaeus Mora himself intervened, impaling his rebellious servant. The Prince of Knowledge mocked the Dragon Priest, claiming he had found a new Dragonborn to serve his ends, before obliterating Marak utterly. With Marak's ambitions ended, the last Dragonborn was free to return to Solstheim. But for any mortal, no matter how powerful, striking a bargain with Hermaeus Mora is a dangerous thing, and only time will tell if the Dragonborn is able to avoid the clutches of the Prince of Knowledge. The defeat of Alduin and Marak finally put an end to the ancient threat of the dragons, but this did not end Skyrim's problems. If anything, it only further exposed them. Though the Dragonborn's victory over Alduin is well known to all, it is still unknown how the civil war was resolved, or indeed if the conflict is still raging. Looking in from the outside, there are 4 obvious ways this civil war could conclude. The first is a total Imperial victory, with Legion forces storming Windhelm and putting down Ulfric Stormcloak for good. While it would certainly cause some damage to the Eastern Holds, this would be an ideal result for the Empire, allowing them to focus their resources on defending against the Altmeri Dominion. The second possibility is a complete Stormcloak victory, involving them seizing the City of Solitude, and finally driving Imperial rule from the province. This would result in the establishment of an independent Nordic kingdom, yet it would leave the Empire crippled. The heartland of Cyrodiil would be severed from its last remaining province in High Rock, and this may provoke renewed aggression from the Thalmor to the south. But the geography of Skyrim, as well as the limited resources of both sides in the war, make a quick, decisive victory difficult. This leads us into our next possibility, a frozen conflict. If either side fails to make a significant breakthrough, then a border could be drawn down the middle of the province, with an independent kingdom based in Windhelm to the east, and an imperial government based in Solitude to the west. In the absence of a peace treaty, these 2 governments would still technically be at war, though any fighting would be low level, probably little more than border skirmishes. As we have seen in the Second Era, there is precedent for this east-west divide, and the central mountains provide a convenient natural border. This might be the most likely eventuality, and in its own way, it would be convenient for both sides. The Empire would be rid of a rebellious vassal, whilst the Stormcloaks would have the chance to rule themselves. Yet there is one other solution. If the Dragonborn chooses to face Alduin while the civil war is still ongoing, then there is the option of calling a Grand Council to decide a ceasefire to the conflict. The 2 sides will meet at High Hrothgar and a summit mediated by the Greybeards, and discuss brokering a truce until the dragon crisis can be dealt with. In time, perhaps this truce could be turned into a negotiated peace. Now, considering the bad blood that has brewed between Imperials and Stormcloaks, a ceasefire seems unlikely, albeit not impossible. And even if a truce was agreed, it's questionable whether it would hold for long after the defeat of Alduin. After all, there is a reason the Old Nordic word for war means season unending, and it's unlikely that lasting peace will come to Skyrim anytime soon. Now, let's take a look at how things stand in the 201st year of the Fourth Era, and the role that Skyrim could play in shaping Tamriel's destiny. It seems inevitable that the Empire and the Aldmeri Dominion will clash once more, and this Second Great War has the potential to be even more devastating than the first. Due to the war in Skyrim, the Empire is vulnerable, and worse still, it is now without an emperor, with Titus Mede II having been assassinated by the Dark Brotherhood. This could not have come at a worse time, for in the coming war, the entire fate of Tamriel will be at stake. For the Thalmor's goal is not simply to dominate Tamriel physically, but to remake it altogether. It has been widely theorized that the Thalmor's goal is either to control or deactivate the 8 metaphysical towers of Nirn, the structures that are thought to hold up the realm of the Mundus. Control of the towers would give them control over the world, and the destruction of the towers could plunge Tamriel back into the primordial chaos of the Dawn. If this is truly the ambition of the Thalmor, then they are worryingly close to achieving it. Only 2 of the towers are confirmed to remain active, that is, Skyrim's Throat of the World, and the Adamantine Tower in Iliac Bay. Now it must be noted that the tower's theory is speculation, and it's far from confirmed. But whether the Thalmor truly intend to conquer the towers, or just assert their dominion over Tamriel, their path will ultimately bring them into conflict with the Nords. No matter the outcome of the Civil War, Skyrim will not be safe from the Thalmor threat, and it seems unlikely that the Nords will be able to stay neutral in the coming conflict. But to understand why the Nords and the Altmer are on such a collision course, we need to look at the foundational myths of both cultures. The text known as the Monomyth explains the philosophical divide between man and mer. The schism in the human Aldmeri worldview is the mortal's relationship to the divine. Humans take the humble path that they were created by the immortal forces, while the Aldmer claim descent from them. It doesn't seem like much, but it is a distinction that colours the rest of their diverging mythologies. This difference is most obvious in each culture's view of Lorcan, who the Nords know as Shor, the missing god who created the mortal plane. Men view him as their originator and divine protector, whereas the Mer view him as a trickster deity who robbed them of their immortality. They view Lorcan's creation of the world as the original sin, and some believe it must be undone so that they can reclaim their lost divinity. For the most fanatical Altmer, including the Thalmor, true freedom lies not in ruling the world, but in remaking it altogether, turning back the clock to create a new Merethic era on Tamriel. And for this to be accomplished, Talos has to die. The idea of a man becoming a god is pure heresy to the Altmer. This is why they are willing to go to such length to purge Talos. In this war, faith and ideas are just as potent weapons as magic or steel. Our story began with the battle at the dawn, the armies of Shor clashing with those of Auriel, the father of men versus the king of the elves, the spirit of change versus the embodiment of order. And it seems likely that Tamriel is heading towards a repeat of this conflict, the final stage in a war that has reverberated throughout history, fought again and again across different times and places. And no matter where this war is fought, the sons and daughters of Shor will be there, lifting their weapons against the old enemy one last time. And perhaps for this final battle, Shor will return once more, reclaiming his empty throne in Sovngarde, and the war that began at the dawn of time will finally come full circle. Whatever the next chapter holds, one thing is clear. Skyrim faces an uncertain future. Whether led by the Empire, the Stormcloaks, or as part of some kind of alliance of free peoples, the people of Skyrim will soon find themselves swept up in a war that may determine the very fate of the world itself. But until then, we can only wait to see what the future will bring. For we have not heard the last of the Nords of Skyrim. As the old order on Tamriel crumbles, and a new world struggles to emerge, the Nords will fight for their place in the world. And like their ancestors of old, they will fight that battle to the bitter end, whether it brings victory or death. Thank you for watching, and sticking around until the end. This is a sequel of sorts to the long-form Morrowind video I made a while back, so if you like this one, you might want to check that out too. I've covered some of the topics in this narrative in bits and pieces elsewhere, but you can consider this to be my definitive version of the history of Skyrim. I'm looking at making one on the history of the Empire too, though don't expect that anytime soon, because there's even more to grapple with there. Anyway, I'd love to bring you more long videos, so please consider liking and subscribing. It really does help the channel. And please let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if there are any other topics you'd like to see me cover. But I think I've gone on for long enough one day. So until next time, take care.